Good morning. I'm Leila Abed, Acting Director of the Wilson Center's Mexico Institute, and it is my pleasure to welcome all of you who join us today, both in person and virtually, to the Mexico Institute and Border Trade Alliance 10th Annual Building a Competitive U.S.-Mexico Border Conference. Each year, this event brings together key leaders for a dialogue that focuses on improving border management to strengthen the economic competitiveness of the U.S.-Mexico border region. This year's conference will explore topics that include customs and trade practices, how leaders are preparing for the 2026 USMCA review, emerging technological threats and opportunities, the new administration in Mexico, and much more. This year's conference features panels discussions with executive office leaders and lawmakers from the U.S. and Mexico, diplomats, academic, experts, and private sector representatives, all of whom bring their own special insight into the issues facing our border region. We are truly grateful for all of the speakers who join us today. I also want to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors, whose support is fundamental to this event. We thank General Motors, Puerto Verde Global Trade Bridge, Constellation Brands, Commodities Integrated Logistics, Cameron County Regional Mobility Authority, Sam Houston State University's Institute for Homeland Security, Nature Suite, IBC Bank, the American Trucking Associations. Thank you all for your gracious contributions. Before we begin, I want to go over a couple of housekeeping items. There are printed agendas outside of the auditorium, and for our virtual guests, you can find an electronic version of the agenda on the Mexico Institute's website. For those of you here in person, we will have a coffee break at around 10:55 a.m., but we kindly ask you that you refrain from bringing food and drinks into the auditorium. Our luncheon will be held in the 6th floor dining room across the hall here from the auditorium, so please make your way over there after the conclusion of the 4th panel. And without further ado, I have the great pleasure of introducing the Wilson Center CEO and President, Ambassador Mark Green, who will be providing opening remarks. Welcome, Ambassador.
Thanks, Leila. Good morning. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Wilson Center, and welcome to our 10th annual U.S.-Mexico Border Conference. These sessions, focused on enhancing the competitiveness of the U.S.-Mexico border, aim to highlight just how interdependent our two nations truly are. The border is not where Mexico and U.S. meet, as much as it is a reminder of the deep historic, cultural, familial, and economic ties that we have. No other border region in the world is as vast or as dynamic as the U.S.-Mexico border. It is the defining point of U.S.-Mexico cooperation on issues such as migration, trade, security. While the southern border of the U.S. is often perceived as the origin of binational crises, the reality, as many of you who live and study the border know, is that the place is a region that is filled with opportunity on both sides of the border, opportunity for entrepreneurs, opportunity for workers, opportunities in so many ways to lift the lives of all of us. The border is not a dividing line. It is a crossroads. It unites us in so many ways. And it reminds us that only by deepening U.S.-Mexico cooperation can we solve many of the shared challenges that we face. Challenges like climate extremes, the global migration and refugee crisis, the attraction of new investment to facilitate trade, the promotion of economic growth, combating illicit trade, and succeeding in competition against command and control economies like China and Russia. Look, the flashpoints are what get attention. We all know that. But the U.S. and Mexico are closer than ever before. Last year, Mexico became the U.S. top trading partner with two-way trade totaling just shy of $800 billion, surpassing trade with both China and Canada. What doesn't get enough attention is that both economies are deeply intertwined, interconnected, and more importantly, interdependent. Mexico is the U.S. first agricultural trading partner and the first and second export market for 28 U.S. states. Mexican trade and investment supports over 5 million jobs in the U.S., and Mexico is the U.S. largest export market for gasoline and other refined products, including natural gas. For Mexico, the U.S. is key for its economic development. Last year, remittances from the U.S. to Mexico reached a record high of $63 billion, boosting the country's economic activity. USMCA, which is about to celebrate its 4th anniversary, has provided for all nations a legal and regulatory framework to promote trade, to strengthen economic collaboration, and to build a competitive, sustainable, and inclusive North American region. It has secured $1.57 trillion of annual trade between the three countries, strengthening regional supply chains. Today's border conference will cover and analyze many of the issues that will be critical ahead of the 2026 USMCA review, including Chinese investment in Mexico, looming USMCA trade disputes, the impact of AI, and much more. With presidential elections on both sides of the border this year, the next leaders of the U.S. and Mexico must be ready to reaffirm the necessary conditions, rules, infrastructure, workforce, energy resources, and security to strengthen North American integration, to promote job growth, to boost the region's competitiveness compared to other global trading partners and arrangements. I know we all agree. I know we're all ready to charge on. The Mexico Institute is one of the most important parts of the Wilson Center. We care deeply about U.S.-Mexico relations, and we care deeply about working together to make sure that challenges are turned to opportunities. It is now truly my pleasure to introduce Leila Abed, Acting Director of the Wilson Center's Mexico Institute. I think we can all agree that few people can rival her when it comes to passion for the potential. You see, everybody knows that. I noticed but it's an opportunity for all of us to work with her to build and reach the potential of what U.S.-Mexico relations can be. And she will provide us with some remarks on today's conference. Leila, it's all yours.
To not take too much time from our incredible congressional panel, I am going to take this opportunity to introduce our wonderful moderator, Hector Sena from IBC Bank. Hector, welcome to the Wilson Center, and thank you to all the members of Congress for being here with us today.
Thank you, thank you. Is Britton going to take the word?
Good to see you.
Good morning.
Morning, Hector.
Like those of us that live on the U.S.-Mexico border, you got to be quick on your feet, and we had a change in our schedule, and Mr. Garibay had to leave. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, and wonderful. I think Ambassador Green is absolutely correct. The Mexico Institute is key and one of the best parts of the Wilson Center. And we're, as a member of the BTA, we're happy to join this conference and for the 10th time. It's my pleasure to introduce our panelists today. Representative Lou Correa from California, Henry Cuellar from Texas, of course, and Greg Stanton from Arizona. They need no further introduction. Let's just get straight to the comments. And Congressman Cuellar would like to start with you. Yesterday at our BTA meeting, there was a statistic that there was, on average over the last 100 years, probably three international crossings approved every 10 years, and there was 3 crossings that were approved last month. Would you please opine on that and give us a little bit of background on how that occurred?
Yes, and Hector, thank you so much. And where is Ruben anyway? Yeah, no, I'm just kidding. I think he was with Sam Bell last night at dinner. That's what I think. But I do want to say, Hector, thank you so much what you do in that part of the border. Britton, again, it's a pleasure being with you and Sam and some of the other folks from South Texas last night. And I certainly want to thank both ambassadors, Green and, of course, Anthony, you were there. And I think we met, Afghanistan, Iraq, and then, of course, at Mexico, and I appreciate it. I appreciate all the writings that you do about trade between the U.S. and Mexico, and I want to thank you. And I see a lot of people from South Texas, from Laredo, and other parts of the border, so I certainly want to say welcome. And one of the smartest guys here at the Wilson Center, I bet, is Eddie, and Eddie, what else did you want me to say about you? And, but I do want to say congratulations. Hopefully the acting will become permanent because you have the qualifications. Let me, first of all, you're right. First of all, for us that live on the border, we're not some of those, I think all of us know the border. Some folks go visit the border for a few hours and they think they know the border better than some of us that breathe the air, drink the water, et cetera, et cetera. We understand that the Rio Grande or Rio Bravo doesn't divide us, but actually unites us as two countries. And certainly trade is very important. As they mentioned a few minutes ago, Mexico is our #1 trading partner. I'll give you one example about Laredo. If you look at the number of trucks that pass Laredo in one day, just line them up, they would go from Laredo up to 200 miles north of Laredo. If you look at the number of trucks that pass through Laredo in a month, they go from Laredo, line them up, all the way to Rio de Janeiro. If you look at the trucks that pass through Laredo on a yearly basis and line them up, they will go around the world 3.4 times. And I checked with CBP and the trucking industry to make sure I was right on those numbers. So trade is very important. You got places like Maverick County and the Valley and Arizona and other places that are just growing. So bridges are very, very important. The problem with bridges is that there was no alignment. You would have to wait for the environmental and under the former president, President Trump, he did it right. They did it at the same time, in my opinion. In fact, Laredo, Jerry, you know this. In Laredo, the Kansas City, now the Canadian, I met a bet with the CEO that this permit was going to be approved in 4 months. I said, no way. I still owe them lunch because it was approved in less than 4 months. And that's because they were able to do the environmental work at the same time. So Senator Cruz and myself worked on the legislation here on the Senate side, and I do want to thank Senator Cruz. And then, the work we did on the House side, we basically said, very simple, just like under the prior administration, is that if you do the work, do the permit, you can do the environmental at the same time, so there's no delays. I personally would have asked for longer than December 31st of this year, and maybe we can try to expand it, and I also would have not put 4 or 5 bridges. I would have added more. We did get 3 approved rather quickly. I think the next one, application for the Columbia Bridge Nuevo Leon will be filed probably October, November of this year. Don't know where we are with the 4-5 in Laredo. So we might have 2 more, hopefully, but I know at least one of them will be filed before. And that's the way we should try to do that, where you can just expedite the bridges itself. Because, bridges do take a little bit of time. And you got to not only construct them, got to work with the Mexican side, but you got to make sure you got the personnel, the technology, and the right footprint for the bridge. Because a lot of the bridges that we have, when we were trying to add it, and I'll finish with this, when we added in Homeland Appropriations a lot of money for technology, the problem was they didn't ask us for construction money. So for the footprint, they had the technology, the non-intrusive equipment, but they didn't have the money for the technology. And I think we added that. We need to do a lot more. But the footprints for the new bridges are so important because bridges now are not only for trade and tourism, but lately they've become the third dimension, which is immigration also. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Congressman. In no particular order, Congressman Stanton. At our BTA meeting yesterday as well, we had a chance to visit with your colleague, Representative Juan Ciscomani, and he talked a little bit about a bipartisan delegation that you all sponsored and took to the Arizona border. Living on the U.S. border myself, we've always said that people in Washington or in Mexico City don't really understand what it is, nor they do in terms of Texas, the Austin and Saltillo. Was it helpful for your colleagues? Did it open their eyes, perhaps? Can you opine a little on that?
I can, and it's good to be here back at the Wilson Center. I have always appreciated the work that you do. I have a history here. Before I was in Congress, I was a mayor of Phoenix, and I was mayor of Phoenix during a very difficult time when Arizona had passed SB 1070 and kind of turned our back on the relationship with Mexico. And I, as mayor of the big city, wanted to go in a very different direction and say, we really appreciate that partnership with Mexico. We need it for our economy because Mexico has always been Arizona's #1 trade partner. So while during my time as mayor, I took 18 trips to Mexico, trade missions with the business community, et cetera, to try to change the script. The Wilson Center was very supportive of it. We had a lot of events and meetings here to support that relationship. And Ambassador Wayne, you were so kind to greet us and support our work, knowing how important it was to build the bridges, both metaphorical and physical, that the congressmen were talking about, as opposed to the other direction. So I've had a good working relationship with the Wilson Center for a while. Yes, I think it's an obligation of each of us on this panel that are in border states to try to better educate our colleagues who, kind of understand the border for what they read about, maybe some of the heated rhetoric that they hear about, but to actually come down and see it with their own two eyes and not just take the photo at the border and get out of there, but actually spend some time. And so Congressman Siscomani and I decided it was important that we do it in a bipartisan way, lower the rhetoric, and let's just do a real educational trip. We had members from California, from Illinois, from New York. We worked with the Bipartisan Policy Center to put together the trip. And of course, we did visit the Border Patrol and Customs to look at the actual physical infrastructure at the border and security situation at the border. But that was just the beginning of it. We crossed the border and visited a few of the maquiladoras there and see some of the economic opportunity just south of the border. I think it really opened the eyes of a lot of the members from other parts of the country. We visited with professionals in trade on the our side of the border, particularly in Nogales, to understand how much business is done across that border. We visited with diplomatic officials working on south of the border as well. We met with some of the universities, talk about it from an academic perspective as well. But the whole point was, there's this misconception because of the heated rhetoric you see so much in the media that it's all about security, security only, border security, et cetera. That is such an incredibly important part of what's happening right now at the U.S.-Mexico border. But right now, this is such an important moment in U.S.-Mexico relations. This kind of what I call the nearshoring moment, this moment that if we take full advantage of it with tensions with China, we can, even though Mexico is now our #1 trading partner overall, we can grow that exponentially if we take advantage of it and have smart policies on our side and smart policies on the Mexican side. And there's opportunity with this new administration, if they get it right, to see that trade relationship grow exponentially. So we wanted to make sure that these members from around the country that didn't have as much experience at the border in a bipartisan way understood that this relationship is about security, it is about proper immigration reform and passing smart policies as it relates to immigration reform, but it's also about trade and ultimately economics. And if we get this right, this is a wonderfully unique moment in the U.S.-Mexico relationship. We've got to take advantage of it, and so we should be smart about nearshoring and getting this right in this important moment.
Congressman, we thank you for taking that delegation and introducing them to the border. They could get more familiar with it, but just as importantly, I think that the fact that you dealt with the private sector when you're down there. Sometimes delegations go down and they only see the public side, but they see the business side. That extremely important to meet with the local.
The private sector groups are a lot more fun as well. So yeah.
Congressman Correa, you and Congressman Gonzalez, he's the congressman from my district, sponsored a bill to allow Customs and Border Protection to make certain repairs to the ports of entry without having to involve GSA. The bill was recently approved in committee, and for folks who might not understand, there's sometimes a contentious relationship between CBP and GSA at the ports of entry. Tell us, it was a great bill. Tell us why you introduced it and what motivated you to pursue that, which I think is extremely important.
Muchas gracias, su congresista Luis Correa. First of all, any Californians here? Yeah. Come on, folks, come on. And want to thank everybody for inviting us today for this great event. Ambassadors Green, Wayne, Eddie, Bila. See the ambassador here, Ambassador Wayne. I'm reminded when the state legislature that we led a delegation to Mexico City. Le caímos como paracaidistas de sorpresa. And so that night at his house, he invited us to dinner at his house. He wasn't ready for us, and we ended up having Costco pizza that night. The best dinner I had that week. Muchas gracias. Thank you for hosting us. the thoughts about bureaucracy, GSA border, bureaucracy, I think there's a bigger issue here, and I think it's the elephant in the room that we don't talk about, which is the attitude that we have towards Mexico, and Mexico has towards the U.S. We're all interdependent. I'm a Zacatecano, okay? I'm a U.S.-born Zacatecano. My dad, U.S.-born Zacatecano. My grandfather came to this country in 1900 to work on the railroads. So what? When you grow up, you think you're the only odd duck with these characteristics. Then you find out everybody in the room, Orange County, California, Republican Orange County, Zacatecanos. I go to events, ¿cuántos son de Michoacán? ¿Cuántos de Jalisco? 3/4 population. We forget the historical connection. Remesas a México. ¿Cuánto dinero no mandamos a México? 70,000 millones de dólares. Where does the border start? Where does it end? Those relationships, those economic relationships are deep, and interdependency is the lifeblood of Mexico's economy and now the U.S. We're going to build a border wall. It's being built since the days of Clinton. It's a bad thing because it sends the wrong message, which is us versus them. But it's going to be built, okay? Mexicanos, Latin Americans, Central Americans, they don't want to be Americans, but they want the American dream. We talk about the Chinese, the Russians. We can compete with them one-on-one. But it's up to us to figure out that roadmap. Peru with a free trade agreement with China? Are you kidding me? Have we been asleep at the wheel in the United States? Then we complain about what is going on in our own backyard? It's our attitude. We're more focused on Europe, Asia, until we see a fire in our backyard. Then that's what we want to figure out, why did it start? Okay? First, we take care of business, which is we understand the importance of the relationship with Mexico and the rest of the Americas. USMCA is going to provide a tremendous opportunity to kick the tires, to see what's been working and what has not been working, and to modify it and to begin to have that as a blueprint for the rest of the Americas in terms of trade. I've been talking to other countries south of the border. They want in. They want to work with us, as they should. You know, ultimately, I've talked about what we needed to do as a nation. We want to be leaders. Let's be leaders. We should have a Marshall Plan to restart the economy south of the border. If any of you have gone, not only to the border, but Honduras and the other nations, COVID has devastated those economies. Those economies, with all the respect to my Hondureños, are non-functional. What you see at the border is a symptom of a bigger challenge, bigger issue, but nobody's talking about these issues. We're talking about building a wall, border security. Important, absolutely. But how you address it, the fundamentals, is even more important, and we are not talking about it. And I'm going to tell you, we are the reflection of our constituents. They vote us in. You have to help us plow the field. Change the narrative. The narrative should be the bigger picture. Where are we going to be 10, 15, 20, 30 years? We can do better than we've done. This is not the U.S.'s fault. This is not Mexico's fault. It's all our fault. Growing up, les voy a decir, cuando vivía en México, no me bajaban de ser pochito. Oh, he's the American-born citizen. Let's do things to him. Today, we have millions and millions of American citizens growing up in Mexico. I go to Mexico and I try to meet with these kids. Sometimes they can't get public education. They have to falsify the fact that they're Americans. Sometimes they can't get health care. ¿Qué pasó? I had a debate with a state senator from Mexico years ago. She said, we'll start taking care of yours as soon as you start taking care of ours. Mujer, what do you think we've been doing for the last decades? This is a bad attitude to have. Change it. Start talking about the future of our little children, And the border doesn't start or end at the border. Let me conclude by saying that I think we all understand the importance. It's just when we have the flashpoints that we pay attention. Example, right before we lifted Title 42, went to San Isidro, the biggest crossing probably in the world. My port director, San Isidro, met with Mexican federal, state, and local, and the private sector. They asked us, please do not shut the border. It is our lifeblood. Yes, it is, folks. But please help us manage the border, because if Title 42 goes up and we get overrun, that border will be shut. We get it. Title 42 lifted, anticlimactic. Nothing happened. We can work together. We can get there. Muchas gracias.
Congressman Correa, the next question kind of ties into what you're saying right now. When President earlier this month made his proclamation on asylum claims at the border, you issued a statement saying that you'd prefer to be concentrating on solutions like additional personnel to manage trade and immigration at the ports of entry. How do you, and you've indicated what you communicate to your constituents, but what else do you say? I mean, we obviously need a better plan, but how else do you articulate that when they think that we need resources for enforcement resources versus facilitating trade and legal immigration?
We're putting Band-Aids on a problem that's going to continue to bleed. Like I said, we're going to build a border wall. It's continuing to happen. It's almost done. We'll continue to have more layers of defense. Bottom line is, a good system would be including Mexico, the U.S., and other countries. And we begin to have that, but not enough of it. When you look at immigration, immigration is not an issue about immigrants. Immigration is about the American economy, okay? I have employers in California who have told me, Lou, we're hiring undocumented workers. We have a choice. Either we hire them, stay in business, or don't hire them and go out of business. It's like E-Verify, okay? You force mandatory E-Verify in people, tell you what you're doing. You're giving the small business owner, you're giving the farmers in the U.S. a choice. You comply with mandatory E-Verify and you go out of business, or you comply with E-Verify and stay within the law. So what do? Comply with E-Verify, go out of business, or break E-Verify and stay in business. So I think the issues are, I also carried some legislation and I was not successful. I had an amendment to the Homeland Security bill last year that would have allocated more money from the green uniforms to the blue uniforms. And for those of you that aren't on Homeland, green is the patrol between ports of entry. Blue is the ports of entry. I wanted more personnel at the port of entry to be able to process people coming and going, and more importantly, process trade, and more importantly, look for fentanyl. I couldn't get support from either side. The progressives didn't like it because they don't like funding anything at the border. And of course, the other side didn't like it because they prefer green to blue. So there you go.
Interesting. Congressman Cuellar, you and Congressman Gonzalez recently worked together to include language in the appropriations bill that would withhold funding for Mexico until the United States and Mexico have entered into an agreement to balance the deficit of water deliveries to the U.S. The Border Trade Alliance has been in communication recently with the State Department about the importance of reaching a satisfactory outcome on this issue. Can you explain to the audience what's going on with this dispute and its effect that it's had on the Texas border region?
Yeah, water, as you know, as Mark Twain said many years ago, whiskey's for drinking, water is for fighting, and water becomes a very important issue for both the U.S. and Mexico. 1944 treaty pretty much dictates a lot of the things that we do, how we address that particular issue. I've been in constant contact. In fact, last night I spoke again to Dr. Jenner, the head of the International Boundary Water Commission. They should have signed that last-minute order, but she was in Mexico ready to sign, and the new president-elect wanted to spend a little bit more time looking at this minute order. I think Mexico needs to do their part. I know yesterday I was talking to a friend of ours that was with a governor, and the governor was concerned that maybe too much water was going to go from Mexico to the U.S. So both sides are trying to figure out what to do with that. The language you were talking about in appropriations that we added was trying to do a balancing act. We were trying to get Mexico's attention, but at the same time, you can't say stop the money going to stop fentanyl, stop the money, to do their work. And then at the same time, as you know, the reason the asylum numbers have gone down, it's not that we built a new wall. By the way, I'm still the only congressman that doesn't have a wall, except the state is building one in Stark County. I don't have one in Zapata.
We'll be taking care of you.
No, you know you won't. No, you won't. And so what's happening is that the numbers have gone down, and that's because not that we built a new wall, not because we added a new border patrol, not that we added new technology. Simply is because Mexico started doing its job. And then when the president put out its order, which I think he should have done from day first, should have done that from day first. Also, now the numbers have gone down 45%. So it's not that we added 22,000 new Border Patrol agents, not because we added a new wall, not that we did other things. It's Mexico plays a very important role, and you got to send the message that there will be repercussions at the border itself. When you get 100 asylum people that come in asking for asylum, most of them are let in. But at the end of 4, 5, 6 years, a immigration judge is going to say no to them. 89, 88, 90% are going to be rejected. So the question is, why are we allowing 100% when we should be allowing only 10, 12% at the very beginning? We're doing things backwards at the border when it comes to asylum. On the water issue, again, it's a very I've looked at some parts of the minute order. They're still working on it. We'll see what the new president-elect thinks of it. They still got to do their what did she call it, socialization, that is, get the word out where the Mexicans know how that's going to impact. You talk to our folks on our U.S. side, and we know it's something that we need to address also. I've added language in the appropriations also to think long-term also, in the sense that, usually we think about the water when it's a drought like right now, but we ought to do a better job at irrigation. For example, I've told my folks in South Texas, and they say they're doing this, but why can we not use better technology like drip irrigation like they do in Israel and other places? Why can we not do things ahead instead of waiting for a hurricane or water to come in? And those are the things that we need to address. So water is very important, and as both Lou and Greg know, the border is more than just drugs and crime that people talk about. It's a lot more than that. If you look at the FBI stats, the border is a lot safer than so many other cities. In Texas, they're safer than Houston, Dallas, even some of the areas that I represent away from the border, and they're just safer than it is. But there's a narrative that people that go in and take pictures and go up there for the photo that make it sound like it's a war zone. It's not. It's trade, like you mentioned. It is so important for trade. It's trade, tourism, retail, so much that we depend on the Mexicans and they depend on us. And that's why it's important. And long term, and I'll give a little homework to the Wilson Center, is, I'll show you this because I think you mentioned China. If you look at some of the work that Southcom has done about the presence of China and Russia in Latin America, it's amazing. It really is. It's so many things that they're doing. This is from Southcom. They cover everything from Mexico South. I've been trying to get Northcom's attention, and maybe y'all can help us on that. So this only covers what's happening with China and Russia and Iran to a certain extent in South America. We need more information down there in Mexico. Also, we're trying to get Northcom to do the same thing as Southcom because, like you said, one of these days we're going to wake up like in the 1980s and say, "Oh my God, the Saranitas are there, send Oliver down there," and and we have to pay attention to what's happening to our own backyard. So I certainly want to work with y'all on this and what Southcom is doing, and like. We were in a briefing in Mexico with Ken Salazar, and one of the officers told us, about China coming in and offering to do certain things. He said something I never forgot. He says, the only free cheese is in a mousetrap. And we got to be careful because what China and other countries are doing, they make it very tempting. But we know about the debt trap, what's happened in other places. And we got to make sure that that we know exactly what's happening. I know what's happening in Nuevo León and Monterrey and the Chinese and all that, but we really got to pay attention to that and the 5Gs and the other things that they're doing there. So maybe that's something that we can work with you on that. Thank you.
Nice answered many different topics that we talked about here, and but even that
I know,
even that little
Sam
morsel
Bell is grading us
even
right
that
now.
morsel of cheese is not free. There's nothing is free. But Congressman Stan, one of the comments that Congressman Cuellar mentioned, nearshoring. I've got a question asking about Mexico as a destination for foreign direct investment. Question specifically for manufacturers rethinking Asia to instead bring manufacturing closer to home. What are the implications of nearshoring for the U.S.-Mexico relationship and the North America supply chain?
All right, thanks, and I'll address that question. I just want to talk real quick about a couple of the issues that my colleagues have brought up. First, it's been diplomatic malpractice that the United States has disinvested from the Western Hemisphere over the last few decades, and we are paying a huge price for that disinvestment. This was supposed to be a bipartisan panel. It's now become a partisan panel, so I can say this. The Republican budget goes in the wrong direction again on the issue of our State Department, USAID, and foreign investment, particularly in this region. I cannot believe it in light of this moment, this unique moment that we have right now. And China is filling that gap, and they are cleaning our clock in the Western Hemisphere, and that has to change. For the sake of the United States and our economy. On the issue of water, obviously the water agreements are complicated because in Texas the water agreement flows one way, in Arizona the water flows the other way, and we are in 23 years of drought, and the diplomatic work that needs to be done to ensure that as Arizona and the 7 basin states along the Colorado River have to engage in cuts, we have to ask our friends in Mexico to share in that pain. That is not going to be easy diplomacy, but necessary diplomacy because this is a diminishing supply in the Colorado River, and all sides, the 7 states and Mexico, need to come to terms with that. So we appreciate the diplomatic work that needs to be done and will be done over the next few months to get the right balancing of that. Okay, so nearshoring. Look, the question is, with these tensions in China, with the decision of American companies to look for supply chain elsewhere, who's going to be the winner? Is it going to be Mexico in the Western Hemisphere, or is it going to be Vietnam, Cambodia, or India? You mentioned that the U.S.-Mexico trade is the largest among the U.S. trading partners. Mexico's #1, but the truth is that the growth in that partnership isn't nearly what it should be if we focus in on nearshoring, and that actually Cambodia, Vietnam, India is growing at a faster rate. They haven't caught up to the U.S.-Mexico. But they are probably better taking advantage of this moment of tensions with China, concern about supply chain security, better than U.S.-Mexico. That's heartbreaking because Mexico is our next door neighbor. And so this is so important that we get this relationship right and have that supply chain security. I've got a bill right now, the Semiconductor Supply Chain Security Act, which would allow the Development Finance Corporation, the equivalent of the Belt and Road in the United States, not nearly as robust as it should be, but what we have to allow them to invest in semiconductor supply chain investment in Mexico, Central Latin America, even in countries that wouldn't qualify under the economic model, basically the middle class countries, if you will. But if they're working towards the semiconductor supply chain into the United States. That's a good bill for national security, good bill for the advancement of nearshoring, and it could be a very good bill for Mexico as well. But with the new president, the president-elect Sheinbaum, this is an important moment for her as well to decide how serious Mexico wants to be about partnering with the United States on nearshoring. And energy policy is critically important. It's been the subject matter of Mexican politics for a long time. But are they going to adopt an energy policy that advances growth, that allows for the investment? Security policy. UPS did a study about U.S. CEOs, about their concerns about nearshoring and investment in Mexico. Security was the #1 concern that they had about whether they and their employees would be as safe as possible. So getting the situation with the cartels, and I know it's a huge issue. No one's naive about that, but the perception that the Mexican government, AMLO, and then the new president-elect Sheinbaum, will they confront the cartels in a more significant way than they have? We've talked about it as a tough issue, but it's a real issue about judicial independence and how that's going to affect the willingness of American companies to invest at the level that they should, to take advantage of this nearshoring moment as well. And so there's a series of decisions that need to be made. And then on our side, we need to decide about how serious we're going to be about using our Development Finance Corporation to make a decision that it is smarter to promote nearshoring in Mexico, Central Latin America, vis-a-vis other parts of the world. And of course, it does make sense from a geographical perspective to do that. But yeah, this is a unique moment, and there's a lot of big decisions that need to be made on both sides of the border about whether we can get this relationship right and take full advantage of this moment and bring that economic opportunity to Mexico, to bring the supply chain security that we need for the United States, because so much of this, especially in semiconductors, so much of it goes directly into our national security and military operations. So having a secure partner like Mexico be greater involved is to the United States' advantage. And it's up to us on this stage to make that case to our colleagues in the United States Congress.
Well, BTA was there for NAFTA in the 90s, and we were there for USMCA. So please use this as a resource because we're right on line in that thinking that we need to take advantage of this of North America as a whole. Congressman Correa, you're the ranking member of the Border Security and Enforcement Subcommittee in the House Homeland Security Committee. A border security bill in the Senate that began with a lot of hope earlier this year fizzled right before it even got to a hearing. Now the president has acted unilaterally. Do you have any hope, and I know hope is not a strategy, but do you have any hope that there will be a time when both sides at Capitol Hill can reach a deal on the border and send it to the president's desk? Sometimes they say there's no political will, but the political will starts here. So your thoughts?
Very difficult. Maybe in lame duck session something will happen, but I think right now you're so close to the election and both camps are so locked and loaded that I don't see anything really happening in the next few months. Again, maybe after the election. With that being said, let me come back to something very important that Greg Stanton said and Henry, which is the nearshoring issue. I want to give it a bigger picture issue, which is strategically, the greatest weapon the United States has militarily is our economy. It's not our missiles, it's not our planes, it's not our tanks. It's access to the American economy, okay? Right now, we have decided as a nation we are no longer giving China access to the American economy. You see that through our trade policy when it comes to tariffs. And I say that because right now, like Greg and Henry were saying, Mexico has the opportunity to take advantage of this limited window of nearshoring. It's not going to be there forever because Vietnam, Cambodia, India are going to be there ready, willing, and able to take advantage of this opportunity. The challenges Mexico has, seguridad. I've got a very wealthy Mexicano in Irvine, in Orange County, was ready to invest in a Mexican factory. He bought a house on the shores in Mexico, and then one day he got a phone call from somebody that said, Yo soy el comandante de los Zetas. ¿Cuánto quiere contribuir a mi campaña? The guy hung up, sold his house, took all his investments, got the hell back to the U.S. Okay? You have a limited window. I don't vote in Mexico. Your business that will affect me. But you've got to take advantage of the nearshoring. And Greg's thoughts about chip making in Mexico, pharmaceuticals, which is in a better position to take advantage of those win-win, are there. It's a very limited window, and I hope that the new administration will understand that and work with us. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I guess the next question is for the three of you. Mexico just elected a new president. We've talked a little bit about that. What are you watching for as the new administration takes place? Specifically, what is perhaps the most important, and expand on what we're looking for this new administration? It's a wide open question. We've talked a little bit about that. Congressman Stanton.
I'll jump in first so that these guys can close. But I want to address real quick the issue that you asked Congressman Correa about. Obviously, tonight's debate is really important. I do support President Biden, and he has an opportunity because of both the policies that Mexico has done, which Congressman Cuellar mentioned, and we are appreciative of the fact that Mexico has done a better job of stopping the flow of migration to the U.S. border, plus the unilateral actions that the president took after waiting for Congress to act, and we were unable to reach a bipartisan agreement despite what happened. That Senate bill should have passed. But I think it's a unique opportunity for President Biden to make the case that strong border security, reestablishing operational control at the southern border, and providing pathways for people to come here to help grow the American economy are not the opposite of each other. We can and must do both. In fact, we don't have a choice but to do both. And I think former President Trump is going to have a very different vision. Hopefully they can actually have a real conversation, not demagoguing, not clownish rhetoric, but a real policy debate about the direction on that important issue. As it relates to the President-elect, President Sheinbaum, look, many of the same issues we've already addressed in this conversation. Is there going to be a change from the current policies vis-a-vis the cartels in Mexico? Incredibly difficult and painful choice, but critically important if we're going to take advantage of this nearshoring moment. Is there going to be a more serious attempt to stop the precursor chemicals from entering Mexico and developing fentanyl coming to the United States? Are we going to better confront that? That has to be done in partnership. That's not that's a U.S.-Mexico partnership, but are they going to be full partners? Is the United States going to be full partners in stemming the flow of fentanyl into the United States? Are they going to get serious about energy policy? And I know it's incredibly difficult domestic politics on that issue, but the opportunities are right there for the taking, and that's going to be certainly a requirement for a lot of companies to make the decision. Are they going to invest significantly in manufacturing or other high energy investments that could be made in Mexico to take advantage of this nearshoring moment? And of course, water is very issue because Mexico is in a very, very difficult spot as it relates to water. Are they going to get serious about more water conservation, climate change policy? I think the one optimistic thing is that obviously President-elect Sheinbaum, her background is as a scientist in climate change. She's an expert in that issue. So are you going to see other forms of alternative energy and expansion of that industry in Mexico, which I think would be a very positive thing for the U.S.-Mexico relationship? We could work a lot together on climate change and climate change policy. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there as well. But Congressman Correa said it right. I mean, we have to change our language as it relates to Mexico. We have to see Mexico as a huge value add for the United States in growing this North American regional economy and trade. We are so lucky to have Mexico as our southern neighbor, to have a peaceful neighbor that wants to work with us. There are challenges in the relationship. It's a very complicated relationship, but overall, what a strategic advantage for the United States, and are we ready to take full advantage of that by having the best working relationship possible? these are issues that the new president is going to be facing, and we're having our own election, so the winner of our presidential election is going to be facing as well the most important bilateral relationship for the United States.
Mentioned earlier that I thought the United States had to implement a Marshall Plan throughout the Americas. It's not going to happen. Our deficits, our fiscal situation will not let us do that. However, again, I come to talk about the greatest weapon the United States has, which is our access to the U.S. economy, access to investment by the private sector in Mexico. So what I would like to see, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the new Sheinbaum administration's policies are, can you make it attractive for U.S. companies to invest in Mexico? What we're looking for, I believe, is predictability, assurances that your investment will be protected. And in that sense, I've heard a lot of complaints that Mexico is not living up to the spirit of USMCA. A lot of challenges, a lot of complaints from the energy sector and others. I'm sure there's some of the other side as well, but these are the issues that we're going to have to address. Like right now, USMCA will be up for renewal in 2 years, and it is going to be a food fight. And so preparing for that right now, the administration in Mexico making the right moves to say we are going to live up to the spirit or not of this free trade agreement is key to moving forward. I'm an American of Mexican heritage. No soy mexicano. No voto en Mexico. I will not say what your right perspective should be or your policies. However, I will tell you as you member of U.S. Congress that these are the expectations. This is my hope for the benefit of all the people who live in my district and, of course, the United States, that we do the right thing for this hemisphere. Gracias.
We start off with a basic premise, que el Río Bravo, Río Grande no nos divide como dos naciones, pero los une como dos naciones. We start off with that premise, and then we'll follow what Greg and Lou both said, that, I think both Washington, D.C. and both El DF, I think they need to listen to experts like the Border Trade Alliance, like the Wilson Center, because many a times they listen to folks that have no clue what it is to live on the border. They have no clue, and I'm talking about both sides. They have no clue. They implement policies that have no ideas. For example, impact. For example, on the border, I always, I want to see law and order at the border, but I still want to be respectful of the immigrants' rights. And I think, the current administration, finally 3 years later, they're doing what I think they should have done from day one, and that is, you got to listen not only to immigration advocates, and they were listening to only immigration advocates, nothing wrong with that, but you also got to listen to our men and women at the border, our Border Patrol, our OFO folks, but you also got to listen to border communities. And if you notice this last announcement, who did the president have there? Border community mayors. Finally, they listened to the border community mayors. So again, they need to listen to folks at the border because for us, like us that live at the border, we understand it. For example, some of the things we did, for example, some years ago in appropriations, I added language. We don't legislate in appropriations, but we do. The public-private partnership, where you can get that, and later Senator Cornyn and I expanded on that, but that was in appropriations. Like Lou said, we always have to tell some of our friends that it's not only men and women in green, which we support, but you got to add men and women in blue also. I want to say that one of the things that I added in the appropriations to add support staff, Border Patrol processing, whatever they call them, the support staff, because they were taking men and women from green to go babysit, change diapers, make sandwiches for the migrants, which is important, but that's not their job. It's security. They were taking men and women from blue, from our bridges affecting Laredo, Eagle Pass, El Paso, and other places to go change diapers and go make sandwiches. And David Hirgeson, who's over here, and I always say I give credit to him, he's the one that said, hey, we ought to look at this idea to get support staff so they can do that work, and men and women in blue can stay where they belong at the bridges. The non-intrusive equipment that we added a lot. They forgot, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, to say, hey, by the way, we need to change the footprint because our bridges were built this way, and we need the new equipment. And that's why we got to listen to people at the border. This is why the Wilson Center and the BTA play an extremely role. And I hope the administrations of both sides will listen to the people that actually live there and don't go down there just for a photo op. And I'll conclude what I was joking around last night at dinner. We had some members that went down to the border. They were at the Rio Grande down there, and they said, they were doing their video, and they said, oh, this is a very dangerous thing. Here's the river, and, drugs are coming in, and migrants are coming in. And then all of a sudden, this party boat comes by with people drinking beer and playing music, and all that was going on, while at the same time they were talking about how dangerous the border was. They just don't understand both sides of the border. There's a lot of things that we can do, and I'll conclude with this. It's not only adding men and women in blue, the support staff, the technology, but it's this coordination on the infrastructure that we add on the U.S. side and on the Mexican side. Last time we were there in Mexico at the beginning of the year, the Mexicans were telling us, hey, we're waiting for y'all on some of the areas, and this is why this bridge permitting is very important, so we can do that. So a lot of the coordination, sharing of technology, we might have license plate readers, but can we exchange with that? Or can we get our X-ray images? Can we exchange? A lot of that work, that pre-clearance can be very, very important. And also, it's not only, and I think Jerry and folks that are in Laredo know this, it's not only what we do at our bridges, but what comes out of the bridges itself when they get to the Border Patrol checkpoints. For example, in Laredo, we're already on the way. We added some monies where we probably built the biggest Border Patrol checkpoint in the country. And that's because that checkpoint, the lines are so long with the 18-wheelers, they just don't have the capacity. So if you remember when the trailer crossed that checkpoint and they died, some of the migrants died over there in San Antonio. What happened, they were so backlogged because they just don't have the technology, they don't have the personnel, the space, that they were just letting people go through. The bad guys do a lot of counter surveillance, whether it's drones or whether it's personnel. They know exactly when our shifts are, when the changes are, and we just got to be smarter. So it's not only just adding the personnel, the technology, but it's working with the Mexican side and understanding what needs to be done on this. And it all starts with one thing: listen to the people that live at the border on both sides and understand. So when the policies are being implemented, it is something that will work for both sides of the border. And I hope both administrations will do that. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much for your comments. Obviously, expediting legitimate travel and trade is extremely important for all of us, not just those of us that live on the border. If you ate it or slept in it or have it in your home, it came through a truck at some point in time and probably crossed the border. So it affects everyone in our entire continent. So we appreciate all the hard work you do, and please don't hesitate to take your colleagues to the border and visit with not only the public sector but the private sector as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, good morning. My name is Skip Hewlett. I'm Vice President and General Counsel with Nature Suite. For those who don't know who we are, I'm proud to say, the best-selling brand in snacking tomatoes. We're the largest controlled environment agriculture company in North America that's vertically integrated, which means that we actually plant, grow, harvest, and then have our product distributed throughout the U.S. We sell in Mexico, a little bit in Canada, but all 50 states in the U.S. We are a purpose-driven company built on the purpose of transforming the lives of millions of agricultural workers by being profitable and inviting others to join in that purpose. We are very pleased to sponsor today's event, and I'm very happy to introduce the moderator that most of you know well of our next panel. This panel is going to examine USMCA as we head into its first formal review. And it's an issue, obviously, that all of us, including NatureSuite, are watching very closely. As you can imagine, ensuring continued tariff and duty-free importation of fresh product, particularly tomatoes for us, from Mexico, is a priority. Many of you recall working with Ambassador Tony Wayne when he was the U.S. ambassador to Mexico from, I believe it was 2011 to 2015. He's had a long and very successful career as a diplomat, which, in addition to his service in Mexico, includes a stint as ambassador to Argentina, deputy ambassador to Afghanistan. I would love to hear some stories about that. But today, Ambassador Wayne is co-chair of the Mexico Institute Advisory Board. He leads the Institute's work on USMCA and North America's cooperation, which, as we've already heard, is so critical. But please join me in welcoming our moderator, Ambassador Tony Wayne. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. And we have a great panel here today to talk about a very big topic in a focused way. Thanks to all of you for being here. I think, as you all know, we're coming up on the 4th anniversary of USMCA. You're just counting up, get ready to go to the parties next week, right? But there's actually a lot to celebrate. And we're going to talk about some of what we can celebrate and some of what still needs to be done. As was mentioned, there's an agreed review of USMCA to take place in 2026. So there'll be a busy work agenda when the governments get back from elections and focus again on the very important issue of trade and across this continent. There was really a trial by fire. If you look back from 2000 on for USMCA, we had COVID was going on, supply chains were crumbling around the world. There's been war in Ukraine, rising tensions with China, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the results has been goods trade in North America has been up over 30%. And it certainly has been very important for Mexico. The Mexican trade with the United States has grown significantly. And as we know, there's been a great jump in investment within North America and also what's commonly called nearshoring from many places around the world. So there's just a lot going on. I think what we've seen is in USMCA is the importance of regional trade, the importance of co-production value chain, the importance of economic integration. If you can get the right factors working together to make that happen. There's a lot that we can talk about here today. So, but we do have a great panel to look at this, and I'm going to invite them to start sharing with us from left to right. We have Bob Costello of the American Trucking Association. Trucks are, if anything, there's nothing more vital than trucks at the U.S.-Mexico border, for sure, except getting the trucks able to cross that border. And I'm sure we'll hear a little bit about that. We're going to hear from Amanda Blunt, who's the trade counsel for General Motors. And a lot of those things crossing that border either come from, go to, become part of things that General Motors works on. So very important that's going on. Juan Carlos Baker was former undersecretary for Mexico's economic ministry. I had the great pleasure of working with him on a number of different occasions on different fronts during my years in Mexico, and he has stayed deeply involved in these issues, now running his own firm and doing a lot of thinking on this. In fact, he has a new piece he just wrote that we just published here at the Wilson Center on China, the China factor, and how we all need to start talking together across North America about China. Richard Kai is the president and CEO of the Institute of the Americas, based out on the West Coast, very active place with a lot of thinking. And Richard has really become one of the champions on North America, thinking about North America as a whole and how we can work together there. And there's a very good book, which I recommend to everybody, North America 2.0 or America del Norte 2.1, or 2.0. That he helped pull together and was just published in Spanish a few months ago. But he has done a lot of great work on this whole front to bring us together. So why don't we start off with a few short, insightful remarks from everybody, and then we'll have a discussion after we hear from all the different perspectives. So Bob, please.
All right. Thank you, Ambassador. Good morning, everyone. I guess from the trucking industry's perspective, let me start with the good things that's been going on with USMCA and the trucking industry. If you look at the data, we have seen loaded truck counts in the last 3 years coming in from Mexico increasing at nearly 3 times faster pace than we saw in 1997 to 2019, right? Last year alone, I mean, I think this is a pretty remarkable statistic. I'm an economist by the way, so I have to give some of this data. Total truck freight in the U.S. was down about 5%. Coming in from Mexico, it was up close to 20%. I mean, what a delta that is, right? That is pretty remarkable. Trucks haul 85% of the value of goods via surface trade with Mexico last year. And this is an important one. Truck transported trade with Mexico supported nearly 55,000 full-time equivalent trucking jobs in the U.S., including 37,000 U.S. truck drivers based in the U.S., right? And so that is pretty amazing. If you think about it, the last 2 administrations have agreed on essentially nothing but trade policy and their use of tariffs. And while that can bother me as an economist, it means that our 2 countries have tremendous growth, and the trucking industry is going to have a lot of growth coming at us because of that. So now what do we need to do, sort of the not as good, to address this? One of the things that concerns us as an industry is, in fact, with the migrant situation, a hardening of the border, right? And while some of that may be in between land ports of entry, what does that mean for truck crossings? As an example, the governor of Texas has decided periodically that he wants duplicative inspections of trucks. That creates a long line of trucks coming into the U.S., and I will tell you this, a truck at rest is a truck at risk. And that's what we cannot have. So we need to do things like, and I was just down in Laredo and saw the construction going on for more non-intrusive inspection technology. It's great. We need to use it everywhere. It's coming. I think we can use AI as to help with that. I think that'll make things even speed up even more. But beyond that, we need more infrastructure, more officers, and more lanes and more technology generally. Last thing, as a challenge, systems go down. We know that, right? Everybody hack your phone, right? It'll happen periodically. When ACE goes down, it goes down for a couple of hours. When Mexican customs systems go down, it can go down for days. And that is a problem, right? And I hear that over and over from my members. So we need to, these are some things I think are opportunities to get fixed. I look forward to the rest of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Juan Carlos, please.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me to this wonderful panel, for the opportunity to catch up with good friends and to share my views in no better place than the Mexico Institute at the Wilson Center, that I think does a fantastic job in promoting the understanding between Mexico and the United States, the shared challenges that we have, and many of the things that are already spoken or will be spoken throughout today. Let me just very quickly go about an issue that is obviously affects the border, or it will affect the border, but it's more a more general perspective, and that is the review of the USMCA. I won't bother you with the statistics. You all know that Mexico's the largest trading partner for the U.S. The U.S. is Mexico's largest trading partner. Our two-way trade topples even the GDP of several G20 economies. You know all of that. But what probably we still have to dimension correctly is that in 2026, we all are going to have to reinforce, reaffirm in a way that commitment that started in 2020 as the USMCA, but it dates back to 1994 as the NAFTA. And that is the idea of a regional integration project. That is the idea that the three countries have a common platform that not only identifies us and promotes all these exchanges that Bob was already talking about, but also that represents an opportunity to compare and see ourselves vis-a-vis other regions. Now, I'm putting that on the 2026 context because I see three potential scenarios for the review, which I must, again, underline. When we were negotiating the USMCA back in the day, we never spoke about a renegotiation. We spoke about a review. When we say it's not semantics, it's not only about semantics, because when we say that there is a renegotiation, we are questioning the commitments that we undertook. We are, in a way, putting a table open for anything that comes, and that was not the original intention. When we speak about a review, and think of this as the way that you would approach an issue in your organizations, you detect a problem, you have an assessment on that, then you develop a strategy to address the problem, and you implement the strategy. After some time, you assess whether the strategy was successful or not, and based on those results, you go one direction or the other. And to me, that will be the ideal scenario for the 2026 review. We sit down, we have the technical right people on board. It's a technically driven process. We detect what has worked very well. We check the box. We go about the things that we can do better. We devise a strategy for making those things better. And why not? Maybe 2026 is very different from 2020. So many of the things that this trial by fire that Ambassador Wayne was saying, that we learned the hard way, how to insert or create more resilient supply chains, what to do with the digital technology that has increased several-fold since the USMCA went into effect. That could also be put on the table and have a review that is not only consistent with the original project, but also serves as a platform to the future. Now, that is my most optimistic scenario, and probably that's not necessarily what's going to happen. Hate to break it for you guys, but maybe that's not what's going to happen. So we need to be cognizant, and this is where the work of the Wilson Center and several others organizations and you and your organization can help. Because we need to be very aware that if the process of the review becomes a politically driven process rather than a technical process with some political priorities, we cannot really escape them. But if it becomes entirely a political situation, we probably are going to relive again, and I'm sure that everyone in this room remembers, we're going to relive again the situations that we had in 2017, 2018, that investments were withheld on the possibility that NAFTA could exist no more. Now, if that scenario by itself is not sufficiently daunting for you, consider how the geopolitical context is also playing a part on this. If we go on the worst possible path down that road on the 2026 review, with everything that is happening around the world, we are going to be losing a gigantic opportunity to project North America as the really best region that we can possibly have, and to not only strengthen ourselves, but also strengthen the vision of the future that we share. I will stop here, Ambassador, and I'll be happy to continue with the discussion.
Great. Thank you, Juan Carlos. Richard, please.
Thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to be here at this conference today with the Wilson Center and the BTA. I was the first volunteer program director for the BTA back in the late 80s, so it's wonderful to see Jerry and Russ and others. The Institute of the Americas that I represent, based in San Diego on the UC San Diego campus, is very committed to sort of three key issues. Energy, with an emphasis on energy transition, environment, climate change, and economic competitiveness. We've been very active recently in doing work on nearshoring and recently published a policy paper focusing on the opportunities for nearshoring in the Cali-Baja region. We have a report coming out next month focusing on the specific opportunities related to biosimilar manufacturing, because of the life science cluster in San Diego, we think there's a unique strategic opportunity between Baja California and San Diego that the region can take advantage of. We surveyed 37 companies as part of this research paper, some that are existing operations in Baja and others in Southern California, Orange County, LA, and San Diego that are thinking of investing. So we're deep in this issue. And USMCA came up as a issue and a concern for some companies, because what companies want more than anything else, and we'll probably hear about this from Amanda, they want regulatory certainty. And as Juan Carlos mentioned, the USMCA is up for review in 2 years. My background is environmental policy. Early in the pre-NAFTA years and NAFTA years, I was at EPA. I was the special assistant for U.S.-Mexico Border Affairs at EPA, and then I was the environmental attaché at the Embassy in Mexico with Jim Jones after NAFTA got passed. So I was deep in these issues. And during NAFTA, we had 2 side agreements, an environmental and labor side agreement. Now, under USMCA, there are specific chapters. There's an environmental chapter, a labor chapter. And also, Chapter 22 focuses on state-owned enterprises and monopolies. This chapter on state-owned enterprises and monopolies is relevant in the context of energy. The USMCA doesn't have an energy chapter, but Chapter 22 on state-owned enterprise guarantees that there will be transparency in markets and that there will not be discriminatory practices for companies that try to get into the U.S., Mexico, or Canadian markets. And that isn't, in fact, what's happened with AMLO's current energy policies, which have led to many U.S. and Canadian companies being unable to provide cheaper energy sources through renewables. So this is going to be an issue for the next president, but it's also going to be an issue in terms of the USMCA review. Now, in the context of environment, the chapter for environment specifically has provisions that governments cannot weaken their environmental laws or not enforce them for trade advantage. And here I think it's important to look at the facts, and this is not political. This is just looking at data. If you look at budget for Profepa during Peña Nieto's administration versus AMLO. Profepa is the environmental enforcement agency of Mexico's environmental ministry, which is Semarnat. There's been between 2018 and 2022, 35% drop in Profepa's budget, 45% drop in the budget for enforcement and inspections, and there's been a 74% drop in terms of multas, fines that were collected by Profepa for environmental violations. And I mention this in the context of where I live in San Diego. I serve on the IBWC's advisory board for the treatment plant in Tijuana. And one issue that's come up in public hearings in San Diego is the enforcement of the USMCA environmental chapter, because what they're detecting on the San Diego side in Imperial Beach is heavy metal pollution that exceeds both EPA and Semarnat standards. So that's a direct violation of the USMCA, and there's data to prove it. But nobody has actually pushed it yet. But it could be something that comes up in the food fight that we heard about earlier related to the USMCA. And then finally, there's the issue of water. There's a side letter with the USMCA related to natural resources. There's an acknowledgement that on the issue of water, there are existing agreements like the 1944 Water Treaty that manage those issues, except that in the side letter related to natural resources, it indicates that water cannot be used. If water is used for commercial purposes and has impacts, there could be implications in the context of the NAFTA. But that's in the side letter. I bring that up because right now, as we heard from Congressman Stanton, we have an issue related to water that impacts both Mexico in terms of the Colorado River, but also the Rio Grande for the folks in the lower Rio Grande, because in the early days when the water treaty was signed, the Rio Grande flowed from Colorado and New Mexico all the way to Brownsville, Matamoros. Today, because of El Paso's growth, all of that water from the Rio Grande basically gets sucked up by the metropolitan area of El Paso. So the lower Rio Grande depends on the Rio Conchos from Mexico. And unfortunately, under the agreement, the U.S. guarantees Mexico 1.5 million acre-feet a year from the Colorado River. And on the Mexican side, they guarantee 1.75 million acre-feet every 5 years, average 250,000 a year, to the U.S. But Mexico has not been complying. But again, we're having issues on the U.S. side vis-a-vis the Colorado River. But then you have this issue of why this is all occurring. This gets into the side letter, because what happened because of NAFTA was the Mexican farmers in the Chihuahua area start growing high value-add berries, which take more water, before they were doing dry crops. So there's a lot of issues here to grapple with. And as we heard from Juan Carlos and from the congressman, USMCA is by no means guaranteed going forward after 2026. I believe it's important and essential for our three economies, and we need to push for it, but we do need to work out issues.
Thanks, Richard, very much. Amanda, please.
Well, I'm happy to go last because I can endorse my colleagues' ideas that have been offered this morning. Bob, I love the ideas for bolstering infrastructure at the border. It's essential if we're going to grow investment and trade. Technology and customs efficiencies are a great way to start. Juan Carlos, I like your optimism for a highly technical 2026 review. But given our earlier panel called it a food fight, maybe smart money's on something in between. And Richard, I'm glad you're ready to continue the energy discussion. As you alluded to, no company that's serious about net zero goals wants dirtier, more expensive energy to power its plants. So if you had nearshoring on your bingo card, that's covered before 10 a.m., but I'd also add for today resilience, ally shoring, sustainability. All of these depend on and present an incredible opportunity for the U.S.-Mexico relationship. That's going to be key to many North American companies' de-risking strategies. That has a lot of momentum in this moment. These strategic investments in Mexico will depend on durable partnership at the border and all the things we've already talked about this morning. GM is in. We've been in Mexico more than 88 years. We've got 25,000 plus employees, 4 manufacturing complexes, an engineering center, and a whole network of tier 1 suppliers that add to the investment south of our border. I think it's also key to our 0-0-0 vision for the future, which means zero emissions, zero crashes, zero congestion. What does that translate to? Serious investment in autonomous driving vehicles and in electrification. And our plants in Mexico are already producing the Chevy Equinox EV and the Blazer EV, so they're a key part of that electrification transition as well. So happy to be here and to start talking about what needs to be done now in advance of the 2026 USMCA review and all the ongoing partnerships and discussions that have been key to making our U.S.-Mexico relationship really work, and that we hope will continue to grow and become a key part of sustainable supply chains for North American companies like ours.
All right. Thank you very much. Well, there's a lot to talk about here, so let's just think for a minute. One of the main things that I thought maybe we could a little bit explore is what should we think about doing in the USMCA review? And then next to it, what should we be doing in some parallel processes? For example, as Bob indicated, that really looks at the infrastructure at borders. And it's both borders. You got 2 borders, so you might have 2 separate negotiations. You might have a tripartite negotiation on certain things like having your custom systems not shut down, because We try to use the same one for both borders, many things. Then, at the same time, there's a whole bunch of stuff that needs to take place to support what we broadly call the competitiveness agenda that includes some of USMCA, but most of it is outside the scope of the trade people to deal with. So, for example, in the United States, it's largely the Commerce Department and then DHS that are big actors to get things done, not USTR, who has the lead in the USMCA. So understandably, they and other trade officials will be a little hesitant to get into some of these other vital issues for making things work better at the borders and work better across North America. So maybe I could invite some ideas of what we should focus on trying to do in USMCA and then what we might try to get going in a parallel fashion, but in a fashion that would make sense since you're addressing related issues. Who'd like to toss out some ideas?
Well, I can just relate it to the environment and the incoming administration of Claudia Sheinbaum. I think there's an opportunity for her to reset some things so that the conversations in 2026 go smoother. William Burns, the director of the CIA, once said, "Priorities aren't real unless budgets follow them." And I think going back to this point about Profepa, Mexico's Environmental Enforcement Agency, President Sheinbaum needs to get serious about investing in this area because just from what I'm seeing on the border, it can be an issue. And it's preventable because Mexico has very good environmental laws. They just need to enforce them. So that's just one piece of advice I would give to the incoming administration. I mean, her advisors indicate she's very data-driven, so follow the data.
There are several things that we could probably consider for the USMCA review. But I will just point out that two of them. One is that the issue of the industrial policy, when I was studying, industrial policy was not a good term. It usually meant, throwing away money. But it's making a comeback. Maybe you have noticed it. But yeah, what we're seeing really in several of the decisions, even acts passed by Congress here in the U.S., including the IRA and others, that really is industrial policy. So we should probably start thinking to have some sort of, I don't know if I should call it North American industrial policy, but certainly to be cognizant of what we can do better by dividing up processes and production stages that currently are faced or are located elsewhere. That is what nearshoring is all about. So I don't see an industrial policy chapter in the USMCA, but I do see some of the elements that spark this cooperation and this coordination from an institutional approach. I could see that probably inserted into the USMCA. The other thing that we talk about here in Washington really is spoken widely, but that is China. Because, as I alluded on my first intervention, there's been already this attempt, I don't know if really it's deliberate or not, but this attempt to have the USMCA review as a way of preventing China from using Mexico as the back door to the United States. There is very, very little data to support that there is an actual concern on that. But clearly, it's not about what is currently happening, but what could happen in the future. Now, I'm happy to have that discussion, but that discussion also needs to be supported with data, because if we looked at where we are getting our imports from, well, that is basically China, and that means Mexico and the U.S. We are taking those inputs from China. And by the way, I heard in the earlier panel that the congressman, can't remember which one, I'm sorry, that said, well, we are going to be waking up one day and realizing that we were slipped at the wheel. That's what he said. I'm trying to quote him by heart. But I believe that we had this going on for over 20 years. If we looked at the trade data, Chinese inputs have been coming into North America for the past 20 years. And this paper, this is not, there will be a China panel later, so I won't steal their thunder. But on the paper that Ambassador Wayne mentioned that I wrote for the Wilson Center, that's one thing that I write in that paper. You know, this was in a way even by design. We really decided to go in that direction. So if we are switching that, and this links back to my industrial policy comment, if we're switching back because of the reasons that may be, then the only way that we can do that, in addition to the trade angle, that is the USMCA review, it's by really producing some consistent and coherent, again, I'm reluctant to call it industrial policy, but let's call it industrial coordination, so to speak, in North America.
I think, as review comes up, we can just look over the last few years with COVID and what can happen if we don't have a functioning transportation supply chain system, right? And that should be fair enough that we should be able to build upon the successes that we've had since USMCA went into effect. For example, when it comes to transportation, right? We've been talking about a single window for years, decades probably, right? And there is a lot of distrust, I think, between some of our government agencies about, can we do this? It's time, right? All these are inefficiencies that we build into the system that we can get away with at the moment, but eventually we may not be able to because we don't simply have enough drivers and the system. I mean, Mexico has a driver shortage. We have a driver shortage, right? It's a problem, right? Another one is with resources. I mean, we've talked about it yesterday at the BTA board of directors meeting. We talked about this. The polygraphs that officers have to go through at CBP. I mean, there was even somebody, and I can't remember who. I'm sorry, whoever told it. That there was a person tried to take the polygraph, didn't pass it, and went on to work at the Secret Service. Okay, I mean that's pretty ridiculous, right? And so we need to, we've got to strengthen this stuff. We've got to work on both technology as well as physical infrastructure, all types, in order for us to move successfully forward. Because I'm telling you, this nearshoring idea is just building. This, I think we're in the beginning innings of it, and it's going to get bigger and bigger.
I'll just add, as the token trade lawyer, that there are a lot of outstanding disputes that seem like an obvious starting point for the review, including one on auto rules of origin. Richard mentioned regulatory certainty, which is always great. I don't think we're not so naive to think it will have complete certainty, but it would be good to know what the rule is and a common understanding among the three parties as we continue to work on complying with USMCA for our production.
That would be a good thing to have, wouldn't it? And that means all three governments have to agree they want to address the problem.
Yeah.
We haven't been at that on the three problems, we have not had the three governments agree that they all want to really address the heart of the problem right now, including the rules of origin one. But you're right, that is a big challenge coming up. And you mentioned in regulation, there's a whole big a bunch of regulatory parts of USMCA that haven't even really been touched yet. That would very much facilitate trade across the border if they were looked at closely. So there's a lot to do.
On the
Richard.
issue of regulatory certainty, I just wanted to touch on energy again, because in the last week, Claudia Sheinbaum has provided some clarity in terms of how she sees renewable energy. As we heard in the earlier panel, Claudia Sheinbaum is a scientist. She studied environmental engineering. In fact, she studied at Lawrence Livermore. So she understands these issues and the importance of renewable energy. But also, she's committed to following through on AMLO's agenda for protecting Pemex and CFE. So her idea, which has been proposed, is that she would allow access to the Mexican market on a 54-46% so foreign companies can come in with 46% share, but CFE needs to maintain majority control. Question is whether the market will respond to that. That remains to be seen. It still, I think, is in violation of the USMCA, because USMCA specifically provides for non-discriminatory policies that allow market entry for the best and cheapest provider, and that's not happening.
Can I just complementing what Richard said? And this goes back also to a point that I don't believe has been made. Yes, AMLO's policies, in my own personal view, are a breach of the USMCA obligations. If Claudia Sheinbaum does enact the policies that she has sort of sketched, it could also be a USMCA violation. The U.S. really needs to ask for the panel, for the dispute settlement panel, because what has been happening for the past 2 years, I think, is that the USTR requested what it's called, I won't get too technical, I promise, but they requested consultations, which is just the first stage of the panel, and that allows for a good number of days to go by so that parties can get a last shot at trying to settle this down peacefully. When those days have elapsed, and they have already by more than 2 years, then the US or any other USMCA party is legally enabled to request the panel. And the US and Canada, by the way, we speak about Mexico and the US, but we forget Canada. The Woodrow Wilson doesn't, they have a Canada seat there, thankfully. But the US could ask for the panel to be established. That's really my whole point. And we might not necessarily, Richard, have to wait all until Claudia Sheinbaum really takes the reins of the country on October the 1st, when she will be sworn into office. Remember that the new Congress starts on September the 1st. That will incorporate the supermajority that Morena has. And if they follow through with the constitutional amendments that AMLO is trying to pass as his last act on office, among those reforms, here in Washington, the one that has gotten a lot of attention is the judicial reform, and rightfully so. But remember, let's remember that there is also a proposal to modify the Constitution to enshrine those 54-46, which is completely random, by the way. So we don't even probably have to wait until Claudia Sheinbaum is in office to see if she does it, but rather, if we get those constitutional amendments approved during September, then it's right there, Exhibit A, as the lawyers say, for a potential case, I would argue, but I mean, what do I know?
That would imply eliminating the CRE, which is Mexico's Energy Regulatory Commission, again, reinforcing what Juan Carlos just said.
Right. I think if anybody interested should really look at the list of reforms that AMLO proposed. A whole number of them would probably lead to USMCA violations if they were in fact enacted, which would lead to a challenge for the agreement. And somebody, I think Congressman Lou Correa said we might have a food fight during the review session. Certainly if a number of those reforms were passed, there would be a food fight during that review. And the United States could easily throw a few of its own morsels of food into that fight, including GMO corn, which would be put into the banned in the Mexican Constitution under one of those reforms that have been proposed. So there's a lot out there that might have to be dealt with. And that's not even dealing with whether we can get enough people at the border crossings to actually staff the new technology and the new lanes and other things that are proposed out there that we'll get to talk about later on. Let me just ask any final comments from anybody, and then I think we'll allow people to go to a break.
I do have one final comment. I don't mean to monopolize the discussion. I'm sorry. I promise I will be brief. I don't want to leave you on a bad note, really. I mean, the USMCA has sustained this trial by fire that Tony Wayne and Diego Marroquin and I have spoken, and it will continue to do so. I'm convinced that what we have is much larger than the problems that really come by every single day. But because of that, we really need to treasure it, and we really need to make everything that we can to get it to have it ongoing as we do. If we just continue to concentrate on the politics, if we just continue to address or use the USMCA in our trading relationship and this economic strength that we have to sort of, appease certain bilateral political problems, then we really are misunderstanding what the USMCA is all about. We're going to have the chance to reassess that 2026. And it's important that we get engaged and we get involved because, stakeholders, like all of us really, are the ones who provide the support for the policy decisions that governments make, either endorsing them or questioning them. So let's get going on that.
So one final observation. I think what we all, I think, appreciate here in this room is that the relationship between the United States and Mexico and in a broader context, North America with Canada, is vital to our economic security and our national security. We need to make this work. That means a level of seriousness about some of these issues we're grappling with. AMLO's flippant comment, that markets don't matter, justice does, and that was a subjective view. Well, the markets did respond, with beating up the super peso. And we'll see how things go. But if you look at the value of the peso, a lot of what's baked into that is nearshoring. So I hope that for the sake of our region that Mexican policymakers take the opportunity seriously, because it is a historic opportunity that we all need to take advantage of, not just Mexico.
So we keep saying 2026 because that is the date in the text, but obviously these conversations are starting now. They will pick up after the U.S. election. And in a way, they never stopped because since implementation of USMCA, we've had ongoing dialogues among the three governments. We've had disputes that need to be resolved. So in a way, it's restarting, but in a way, it never stopped. So encourage everyone to continue to be engaged, not just wait for 2026. Hopefully, we can have some productive discussions before we get to that date in the text. And I think some of it's happening now. We've already got some efforts to align among the three parties in advance of the review. Canada just announced a 30-day consultation to consider policy tools available to protect their growing EV market from some of the unfair non-market practices and policies we've seen threatening the North American market and competitiveness. So I think that's one example. Mexico is also doing its own homework in advance, as is the U.S. So it's not too early to talk about this, and 2026 will not be the actual starting line.
And I guess just briefly, I will end where I started. We have seen tremendous growth over the last 4 years from USMCA. Certainly the trucking industry has benefited from that. We will, there are challenges, and in order to keep those sorts of growth rates going, we need to make the investments. Just like we had to do with domestic infrastructure, we have to do it with our border infrastructure as well.
All very wise. And I think that is a very good reminder that all the stakeholders, those who are involved and benefiting from all of this North American commerce, need to speak up and need to be active and not just wait for the officials to sit down in a windowless room and start talking about it. There are a lot of lives and jobs at stake, and so very much encourage all the stakeholders listening today and others who may hear about this to get engaged and be busy lobbying your governments and lobbying your legislatures that this is an important set of agreements and an important time to really focus on making improvements. So thank you all for being with us, and thanks for a great panel, great panelists. Thank you. And I'm going to volunteer. Everybody will be happy to talk to you during the break if you would like and ask some more questions. So thanks. Come on.
Lila, do we have our virtual people on? Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We're going to get started with our next panel. My name is Kelly Wicker, and I have the pleasure of serving as the director of the Science and Technology Innovation Program here at the Wilson Center. And I'm excited about our next discussion that will focus on emerging tech being used at the border. Facilitating smoother, safer, and faster transit across the border is an economic and an environmental win for both the U.S. and Mexico. But any use of technology for security and for moving people is going to come with risks. I'm looking forward to hearing from our panelists about the opportunities we have to expand how we use technology, but also their thoughts about the ethics of doing so and where we should exercise caution. Since we have limited time, I'm going to stop here and introduce our panelists. We'll have brief opening remarks from each panelist, and then we'll get into some discussion. I'll introduce you all in the order that you'll give your openers, and please remember to keep your opening remarks to about 5 minutes or less so we can reserve some time for discussion. So joining me today, we have Humberto Martinez Cantu, the president of Index, Carlos Martinez, the vice president of the Association of Customs Agents Nuevo Laredo. We have joining us virtually Claudia Del Pozo, the founder and director of the Aon Institute, and Pablo Pruneda, the Artificial Intelligence Department coordinator at UNAM. Thank you very much, and we'll get started with Humberto.
Thank you very much, Kelly. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for your time to being here in this nice city. Carlos, thank you for being here. Well, as you know, borders are important part of the human activity. Not only because they allow the flow of people and cargo between nations, but because the interdependence that we have. In this particular case, the Mexico and United States. In 2023, Mexico and United States ended up being respectively the #1 trading partners of the nation, with trade exchange at $798 billion, which is the 26% of the U.S. trade and more than 85% of Mexico, with total of the 7.3 million trucks crossing the borders between United States and Mexico. As you know, it's no busier border port in the world than Laredo, Texas, for the United States, and no Laredo, Tamaulipas, Mexico, where 320 billion of the 798 passes through Laredo. That means 40% of the total trade passes through Laredo, and through Laredo average 17, and sometimes in the peak season is 20,000 trucks per day. In other words, we have 4 cities at the border. The state of Chihuahua with Ciudad Juárez, Laredo, Reynosa, and Matamoros, we cross 50,000 trucks per day. You know what that means? 50,000 trucks per day is a lot. And all of the exchange in figures, an average of the last five years, 82% of the say commercial exchange is carried by the export industry that I represent, the IMEX companies in Mexico. Carrying all this level trade efficiency, fluid, safely, at low cost, without phytosanitary risks, complying with the rules of customs laws and regulation and other agencies, is an enormous challenge. And for this, we require the support of technology. Artificial intelligence is a modern-day technology that poses an opportunity and challenge for our manufacturing industry in Mexico, and recently has made a way to manufacturing already. Manufacturing companies operate in an industry that requires continuous improvement, where changes and advances are everyday occurrence. For many years, primary asset in our companies has been the human element. However, with new technology, we can integrate and with this human expertise to achieve unprecedented goals. In the realm of the trade, it's crucial to closely examine the implications of how technology and now artificial intelligence can impact trade patterns and shape trade policy. Trade policies that encompasses technologies like live streaming, real-time, geolocalization, RFID, radio frequency identification, sensors, scanners, blockchain, and AI must be developed with careful consideration and the velocity of the regional trade and global knowledge is transmitted. This area of trade research and policy presents new and compelling prospects to require in-depth exploration by the private sector, and especially for the law enforcement and trade authorities. Technology can be an efficient tool to address some of the key challenges that we face at the border. The U.S.-China economic dispute is demanding more precise traceability of cargo and origin to destination of the supply chain. High-end technology, blockchain, and artificial intelligence will be a crucial tool for high volume and 100,000 and complex supply chain transactions. As you know, we have many thousand transactions every single day. In this regard, the Index Council that I represent is actively participating in different ways regarding the regulation trade facilitation and the use of artificial intelligence in Mexico, since we understand that this is a strategic and key factor to improve not only the efficiency and competitivity, but the reliability to compliance. On the other hand, our industry is now facing the nearshoring, as you already know. We understand the importance to set up the right environment and the ecosystem around technology in order to support new companies in the country with best possible economic sustainable business environment assisted by right and newest technology possible. As essential way to achieve what I just said, we are also working on the construction the no less important industrial cybersecurity center for Index members. We have right now here one of our director, the IT and Index National, that he is trying to introduce the cybersecurity center for Index, where we will be providing support on different ways for our members that we will help maintain information and systems and protect through our highly qualified strategic to all the affiliated members that we have in Index. Please join and collaborate with us toward this effort to achieve the best to all countries, specifically for United States and Mexico and Canada. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Humberto. Look. Carlos, if you'd like to open up with a few remarks.
Of course. Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. I will thank Lila Abed for the opportunity. And as a customs broker, a Mexican substitute customs broker from Nuevo Laredo, that is our port of entry, Laredo, the most important one, as Humberto said. And I know there's a lot of friends here from the Valley, but we work together. We work together in the same sense and for the same purposes. For us, it's very important to have this reflection about technology, about emerging technologies, about what we're going to do next. Because obviously in customs, technology plays a key role. And it is not something new. It is historically, since the beginning of NAFTA in 1994, Mexico Customs has invested in technology. Since the barcodes, to the single window, to the PITA program, what we have now in DORA, we always have been involved with systems, with technology. And right now, it's the perfect time to ask the right questions about it. And I will give you an example about how technology has functioned. But obviously, We have to defend, and I will start with this reflection. As Juan Carlos Baker said, we have to defend what has been good, what the results of our integration. And I'm very positive in that sense, because what we live in the reality of our border, this amount of crossings that is impressive and that we handle correctly, is because we have done things right. But obviously, we have to improve a lot of ones. We have to make the right reflection in it. And for example, from the 100% of the operations that we daily process, around an average of 10 to 13% goes to for the inspection in Mexico. If it's sensitive cargo, it's 20%. But of this percentage, 77% of these revisions, of these inspections, the time frame, the time of the duration of these inspections are 3 hours or less. 7% are 15 minutes or less. So there's a gap, there's an opportunity we can make easier. And what is the answer to that? More technology, more infrastructure, more staff, obviously. We have the platform, the correct platform in order to have these discussions. I think we can do it right. And in this beginning, in this approach, a lot of things that has happened the last times, we heard a lot about systems, delays, as Mr. Costello said. A lot of people in the transportation community, hey, the systems, the delays in Mexico. And there's also we have to understand what we have been dealing with, what has happened in our country in the last years. Obviously, the creation of the Agencia Nacional de Aduanas, ANAM, has been a challenge. It has not had been a smooth transition between SAT and ANAM, and this represents a challenge we have to deal with. And that is also an important connection, an important way to understand why we have to deal with these system challenges to the future. It is not only that the ANAM and the SAT, because they had trouble to understand them and to say who will be responsible for what, these new responsibilities, the change of the leaderships. We have 4 different ANAM directors in less than 6 years, so we need a better approach. I do see in this conversation, talking about technology, talking about artificial intelligence, we see as customs brokers a major opportunity to strengthen technology as our ally, to make our borders easier, and to take these discussions with 2 approaches. Obviously, trade facilitation, but security and tax collection, which are important for our economy. So I think that is the beginning of what we can comment in this approach. And I do see that we have in the 2026 review, and I hope, as Juan Carlos says, a review, nothing more, a great opportunity to foster our economic competitiveness in our region.
Thank you, Carlos. Do we have Claudia on virtually?
Am I there?
I hear you. All right, Claudia, do you want to get us started with a few opening remarks of your own?
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So I think my specialty is AI ethics, responsible artificial intelligence. So I'm looking at this through that lens. I think, yes, there's a huge opportunity for making trade easier. But when I think about the border, I worry a bit about how these systems might continue automating equality, how the use, for example, of facial recognition at the border between the US and Mexico might have impacts more probably on our side, on the Mexican side, than on the US side. When we look at, for instance, research that has been done and that shows that that facial recognition systems work much better on lighter skin. The accuracy of detection is much better than it is on darker skins. So that is one of the concerns and one of the questions that I have. We can make it easier, like my colleague just said, but let's not forget to include conversations about how do we make sure we're doing it in a responsible way, and we're not making it more difficult for certain people to cross the border and to exchange goods. However, I think there is definitely an upside to this, again, looking at responsible AI, which is obviously, as we advance, different countries are creating maybe regulations. If we look at the European Union, in the US, kind of more guidelines and executive orders on how to use AI responsibly. I think that will be interesting as a way to kind of spread the US's approach to AI regulation, for instance, to the countries that it trades with. And speaking from the Mexican side, I work here in Mexico City. Mexico is very much lacking prioritization of responsible AI, be it from the Senate or the Chamber of Commons. There are proposals, but there hasn't really been a way to make them move forward and be implemented there. We're kind of stuck there. So I think that this is a huge opportunity for Mexico to kind of create a response of its own that aligns to the US's level of AI regulation or the European Union, if we're talking about trade in that direction, and create maybe auto-regulation frameworks, or hopefully from a government level, a complete approach to AI regulation. So I think that's what I'm most excited to see. How does the USMCA include, I know it already includes the topic of data, but the next edition, so to say, will probably have to include a lot more provisions around that and the use of data, how to train AI systems. So that's something that I'm excited to see. And I think it can really pull Mexico into this future where we're looking at AI, yes, but responsibly. So that's what I'm excited to explore here with you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claudia. Thanks for bringing the human aspect in here on this discussion. And finally, do we have Pablo online?
Thank you so much, Kili. It's a pleasure to be here with you, with Carlos, Humberto, and of course with Claudia. The border between the US and Mexico imposes challenges in various aspects, of which I want to highlight the following: migration, organized crime, trade, environment, and public health. To support the solution of each and every one of these aspects, new technologies such as AI undoubtedly provide us with fundamental elements. I will go through some of them. The migration issues can be addressed with the use of the following AI systems. Generative AI is particularly efficient as a translation tool. Therefore, the use of chatbots and multilingual virtual assistants could provide legal information, resources, and guidance in both Spanish and English, and even in multiple native and indigenous languages, helping migrants to understand their rights and available options, as well as offering 24/7 emotional psychological support. AI systems may also be used to automate and speed up processes such as the review and approval of asylum applications and other immigration procedures, reducing waiting time and improving efficiency. AI systems may also be helpful to validate documents and detect fraud, ensuring the integrity of the process. For ensuring compliance with dignified treatment standards and ethical conditions in detention centers and shelters, the use of AI systems in CCTV cameras is also relevant. AI systems can be fed with historical and real-time data to foresee migration flows and better prepare the necessary resources for the care and support of migrants. Also, to identify patterns and migrant needs and optimize the distribution of services and resources. AI-based health systems can be used to allow initial medical assessment via mobile devices, facilitating access to medical care and even provide medical consultations, ensuring migrants receive appropriate and timely medical attention. To address the problems of weapons and drug trafficking and reduce the tensions they generate between Mexico and the United States, various AI tools can be implemented. AI is particularly good at identifying patterns using historical and current data to predict weapons and drug trafficking activities, allowing authorities to increase their efficiency and anticipate movements and operations. Similarly, these systems could analyze criminal networks and identify the links amongst those involved in these illicit activities on both sides of the border, facilitating the dismantling of these crime organizations. For efficient call interceptions, natural processing tools may have real-time transcription and analysis tools to help select and understand relevant conversation amongst suspects. AI tools can help improve trade by optimizing transportation routes, reducing costs and delivery times. Predictive AI models can help anticipate product demand, improving inventory planning and avoiding overloads or shortages. AI systems can automate customs declarations to facilitate and accelerate the process of declaring goods, reducing waiting times and administrative costs. To enhance joint efforts between Mexico and the United States on environmental issues and the management of shared resources, AI tools can be also implemented. These tools can improve cooperation and effectiveness in managing natural resources, protecting the environment, and responding to emergencies. Using AI to predict climatic patterns and environmental changes would be helpful to plan responses to extreme events such as hurricanes, droughts, and floods. AI can also make ecosystem simulations by creating models that stimulate the impact of human activities and environmental policies of shared ecosystems like in our terrestrial or our marine borders. For epidemiological surveillance and early detection, AI systems can be very useful to analyze epidemiological data and predict disease outbreaks, enabling a rapid and effective response. The use of AI platforms that collect and analyze data from different sources, hospital, clinics, or border crossings, can provide a comprehensive view of the health situation. In general, the development and implementation of AI tools to address these important border issues would require close collaboration between relevant government authorities, the private sector, and even academia, non-governmental organizations, and the technology industry to enable systems that comply with ethical standards and respect human rights. Leveraging new technologies can significantly improve the effectiveness of current strategies and contribute to a more cooperative relationship between Mexico and the United States. Thank you.
Thank you, Pablo, and thanks to all four of our panelists for a nice landscape for us to build a discussion on. I want to direct the first question to Humberto.
Yeah.
If thinking about the border as it is right now, what are some of the challenges that we can address with technology? And Pablo kind of covered some of it, but I'd love to hear your take on it as well.
Basically, we have two big challenges in the border, especially in the companies that I represent. First of all, traceability and inspections. As you know, right now we are facing the economic competition between China and U.S., and China is trying to use Mexico like a backdoor, you know. And this is a problem for us, you know. Also, today we need to precise the mapping origin of the materials. In other words, in Mexico, we have auditors that they check us, whatever we bring to Mexico in components, we need to send it back already assembled. And we need to meet whatever is in paperwork, in the pedimentos that we call it. We have experts here in customs that they are helping us to control that kind of situations. The second is the inspections that we have. If it's not well managed, the inspection, we will be in troubles. Like several weeks ago, we have line trucks of 20 miles waiting for on-scene inspection in the United States, as you already know that, you know. And one of the things that that happened several weeks ago, especially in the state of Chihuahua, immediately I talked with the General Andre Fullon, Director of Customs, and immediately put their people to work overtime in order to move the trucks immediately to the United States in order to avoid lack of competition and deliver on time the products with the customers, as you will know.
Exactly.
Okay. In summary, if we use the artificial intelligence and sensors, will help us to speed all the trucks exportations. One of the things that will help us is to meet the supply chains to be on time in the United States. if we don't move in this direction, as I am telling you about inspections and traceability of the components and the finished goods, we will not be very good service that we are expecting to have, especially if we have a real threat to accommodate with the nearshoring is coming. If we don't have the right implementations, we will be in troubles. Talking several weeks ago with the government, they don't have enough people to meet all requirements right now. Can you imagine with nearshoring, we will be in trouble. And it's the same thing for the United States. I hope we can control that and have a very good nearshoring that is coming right now.
Yes, yes, thank you. Thinking about not just how should we use technology to address challenges, but Carlos, you said something that made me think about, you're talking about the leadership changes and the effect that that's had. Sometimes just because we have a tech that can do something doesn't mean we can actually implement it. Could you talk a little bit about your perspectives on some of the barriers to government actually adopting technology that already exists?
Well, that's a great question, because we have to ask ourselves, what do we want artificial intelligence to help us with? And what do we want, what is the goal that we want to reach? Trade facilitation and tax collection and security, everything. Obviously, we always say more infrastructure, more investment, more. But the real question is what we want of. And I think technology can help us with the answers, can help us to reach those goals. But we'll have to have a better understanding first, a policy making in that approach to understand what we want, the goals we want to achieve. And with that sense, having that strategy, I think we right now can say, well, we have a technology strategy at the border. We have to build one. And building this, planning this, executing this plan can help us to have the goals that we need. And obviously, to continue this leadership in the long-term view, I think General Fulton has made a remarkable job, and it will be great if he continues to do it, because we need that kind of a stability in this new agency that is in the border, which is ANAM. And in order to make this collaboration effort to work with, not only with the SAT that is involved, and it could continue to be involved in customs, but also with the major key stakeholders, with the importers and exporters, with associations as Index, as Humberto represent, and I agree with all what he has said, and obviously with customs brokers. And what I see very positive in the artificial intelligence is that in customs, we had the platform. We have the base, the correct base. We have the data. We do it in the systems, and it's not from now. It has happened through the years. So we have this starting point in order to make this work better for us, to strengthen our relationships and strengthen our borders. But we have to first ask, what do we want artificial intelligence to help with?
Yeah, that's great. That's a great reminder. Tech for tech's sake is not a great idea. Pablo, I want to turn the same question to you. It seemed like this may be something you have thoughts on, not just, you did a great job of outlining what AI could help us with, but how do we get there to where we are using it for those purposes?
Thank you, Kelly. This is the most important part of the conversation. Technology offers us many solutions for our problems, but indeed the implementation is one of the greatest challenges that we face. I want to add to what my colleague just said, that to have a successful implementation of AI, you need to have a strong leadership that believes and is determined to implement these technologies. Because we have a human nature which avoids for the changes. We are adverse to changing the way we have been doing things for several years. And when somebody tells you that there's a technology that lets you have or be more efficient, but you have to do things another way, a strong leadership is determined to implement and successfully implement these technologies. Another basic aspect of this is that we need strong and high quality data. Without it, there's no mechanism of artificial intelligence that could provide solutions. We need data which is of high quality, and we also need a good algorithm. Algorithms have to be unbiased, and to avoid what Claudia was priorly saying, to avoid the bias, we need to have unbiased data, and we need to have a multidisciplinary and multicultural group of people that designs the algorithms without a proper or without an individual bias. So strong leadership and unbiased data and unbiased algorithms are other elements that I would like to apport to the answer of your question.
I'd be remiss if I didn't take this hook and go straight to Claudia next and talk a little bit about these questions about, you brought this up also, the need for data that helps us have unbiased systems and the need for algorithms that are tuned for what they are being asked to do. What are your thoughts here?
I think my colleague made an excellent point. What do we want tech for? What do we want? I think we kind of started talking about the need for a strategy, and I think that's crucial. I think that with nearshoring, increasing with more and more nearshoring in Mexico, we're going to see more automation of manufacturing, and there are a lot of jobs in there. There are entire families that depend on manufacturing jobs, especially in key trade areas like the border. And this reminds me, a few years ago, maybe it was 2019, 2020, around there, I led a project in the Borderplex area, which is the area that encompasses Las Cruces, El Paso, Ciudad Juarez. And there were a lot of learnings from there. The idea was, how could we create a regional narrative between those cities in the US and Mexico that would make sense and kind of position that area of even more of a tech hub. And it was really interesting to see that in reality, there already is some sort of similar culture there that we can use to create that strategy. But if we don't create that strategy, I worry about what's going to happen, for instance, in terms of the future of work, what's going to happen to the jobs in Mexico. As trade increases, as nearshoring increases, we're going to get the latest technologies, the best automating tools. What happens to those jobs? If we don't think about it as a whole, I'm very concerned that nearshoring won't really be beneficial to the Mexican population as a whole, but rather just another opportunity that the country missed. When I look at these cities that, or rather when I spoke with people in these cities that are built on trade with the US, what I was told is there's really not a lot of opportunities for young people who don't want to go work in the maquila, in manufacturing. There isn't a lot of opportunity for creativity, for seeing problems on this side of the border and solving them with AI-based solutions. So I think it's super important, again, to look at what kind of binational strategy we can create when it comes to AI to make sure that it isn't an approach that feels exploitative to the Mexican people, but really considers them and is something that can help the country move forward and continue developing. And so that comment of what do we want tech for really resonated with me. And again, the key is going to be, yes, tech, but let's do it well. If we don't have, like Pablo mentioned, algorithms that are, data sets that represent the Mexican population, how are we going to move forward? Going back to my previous example, when I was saying the CCTV cameras that use facial recognition systems, they're very good at detecting very white people. Unfortunately, that is not what the population of neither the US nor Mexico looks like. So what does it mean? You know, I think I'm particularly concerned for migrants, which echoes what Pablo said. How can we make sure that everyone gets a fair treatment? So again, bringing in that human approach, making sure that the benefit is felt on either side of the border, I think we have to work together. It's great to have these conversations led by the Wilson Center, and I look forward to continue having them and continue working with people at the border on how to have common strategies.
This idea of aligning the two nations' strategies and technology, I'd be interested to hear other thoughts from any of our panelists about, are we doing that well and how can we do that better?
I just want to add that my colleague in Mexico said, Pablo, about the data, and we have the correct data. That's a good beginning point. Like from importers and exporters in Mexico that Humberto represents, us as custom brokers, we do this daily in a daily basis. Also, U.S. customs brokers. So that's a good beginning point. We have the correct data right now. So I think we can build upon that. And that was the thing I want to add with this conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Carlos.
Definitely, I agree with Carlos. We have the right data in order to proceed and finish the biggest challenges that we have.
I did want to kind of pick up on, we're coming on this theme of nearshoring a lot, and there are a lot of opportunities for companies on both sides of the border to benefit from better border processes, especially as we ramp up more traffic at the border. Specifically Humberto, but also any of you, what role can private industry play in motivating tech to be implemented at the border? Is there a way that they can help the government see those opportunities and take them?
Well, especially to listen to us or recommendations, because as you know, more than 50 years ago, we started with nearshoring, It's not new. But our recommendations to the new government is to reduce the tramit to make the paperwork in order to get the IMEX program, because right now it's taking year and a half to do that, and we need to reduce the tramitología to bring more industry to Mexico, definitely. And also, one of the things that is our concerns is the reforms that we are facing right now. The meetings that we have with your Congress people here is how we can help to reduce that.
Thank you. I did want to touch a little bit on, again, this theme of how our two countries work together on this. How, in any of your opinions, or all of your opinions, will increasing technology affect the relationship between Mexico and the U.S.? Thinking about how we can both use technology to facilitate things like faster and safer border passage, but also thinking about the effect that it has on migrants and asylum seekers in not always a positive way. And I'll toss that up to anyone.
Well, from a trade perspective, it is very important the governments talk to each other all the time, and to have a common sense and have common solutions for what we live in the trade problems that we have. I right now see a good opportunity with the new administration of President-elect Claudia Sheinbaum. She went to Nuevo Laredo. She went to visit this new ANAM center is built over there, which is impressive. I think every one of us have to visit once in a time what it is built in Laredo, but in Nuevo Laredo. But we hope that the capability, the technological capability, and obviously the correct staffing in ANAM will be in the right direction. But most important of all, also President-elect Sheinbaum announced the creation of a new agency, a new digital agency. And I think that could be key in order to solve this coordination delays or this coordination issues that we have deal with the different interagencies problems, and also in the way it is communicated with the private sectors and us as customs brokers. So definitely there's an opportunity there, and the willingness, an opportunity with this new administration. And obviously we have to wait what will happen in the United States. But I do believe from 2025, and in order to the review of 2026 with the USMCA revision, will be in the right moment and with the right leaderships, because they will be beginning their administration, so they will have time to implement in order to start these discussions and go in this correct approach, a collaborative approach, and to understand that technology It's the right path to take. We don't have to be we have to trust technology. That's something that we have to trust technology, because technology is part of our life, is part of our process. And if we're professionals collecting the data, doing the job, and or have companies that are committed with the development of our countries, we have to trust this technology that will help us and that will lead us to a better understanding. And I think that is what we have to do, and that's the solutions that we have to take.
Thank you. And I want to, on this same question, and Claudia, you talked a little bit about your hope that some of the discussions around AI governance in the United States would flow to Mexico and spark new conversations. I'd love to hear more about your thoughts on that aspect of our two countries' relationship.
Definitely. So I just want to put this in context. Mexico, back in 2018, created, well, actually, the company where I previously worked at, we created the basis for a national AI strategy, which led the country to be one of the first 10 in the world to have such a strategy. It's important to say we never created a strategy. What we offered were bases and topics that needed to be included. Ethics was obviously in there, so was education. And at that time, the previous administration was very interested in promoting technology and prioritizing it. Unfortunately, that's not something that we've seen from the current government. The prioritization has maybe been more on connecting people to the internet, which I think is definitely a priority for Mexico. But my question is, okay, but once you've connected them, once you've made sure that they can access the digital world, how are you protecting them? How are you mitigating risks that these digital worlds bring? So for me, they're parallel priorities that have to be taken. Now, I do hope that the next administration will have more of a focus on technology. With the announcement of the new agency led by Pepe Merino, it looks like it could be the case, although so far the way I interpret it is rather using technology for fiscal purposes, not so much let's help the country continue digitalizing and improve what we can with AI. So that still remains to be seen. And that's why I think we need an external pull. I mean, the ecosystem in Mexico is extremely active. I mean, in academia, we were just with Pablo, a month ago in Tijuana. The industry is extremely active, academia, civil society. What we're missing is the government. And so while we are moving forward, it's like a four-legged table missing one leg. There's only so far we can go. So that's why I hope there's kind of this obligation that comes from maintaining our status as the US's main trade partner that impacts Mexico from a government level, who says, okay, we really need to look at this responsible AI matter. So that's something that I really hope. And kind of bringing this back to a border level, definitely the implementation of AI at a border level would be, or rather pushing for more implementation of AI at the border level would be helpful. But one thing that I worry, and this goes back to your previous question, Kelly, about how can the industry push for this? I'm gonna look at it from a different perspective, is Mexico doesn't really have guardrails on the, I'm missing the word in English, licitaciones, open calls. Can someone just tell me the word in English for that?
Bid.
Bids. Thank you very much,
Thank
Carlos.
you.
So
Team
for
effort.
the bids for technology that they make, they don't really have the guidelines to know that whatever solution they're adopting makes sense, was properly developed, is sturdy, is inclusive. There's really none of that. It relies a little too much on trust and on being a good salesperson. So I think that's something also that needs to be strengthened at the border, but also for the entire country. While we do have to trust technology, I would say, has technology, or rather have tech developers, shown themselves to be trustworthy yet? I think we want to trust it, but there still are a lot of steps before we can blindly trust in whatever solution is offered to us.
And before we wrap, I did want to turn this question finally to Pablo. If you have any thoughts on technology as an aspect of our relationship or an opportunity for our relationship.
Thank you, Kelly. have many things to say regarding your last question and the other topics that we were discussing. Without a doubt, the answer to your question is without a doubt it would affect it favorably. The implementation of technology and meaning this, the joint efforts to solve common problems, such as the ones that I was telling about, crime, migration, health and security, and all those common problems indeed help us and strengthen our relationships between Mexico and the U.S. The improving cooperation and taking into account that the U.S. is the world leader in the development of AI, this is a privilege for Mexico to use this opportunity to adopt the technology and solve our common problems. Regarding the regulation, that's something that Claudia said very, very well. Mexico, it's a little bit frustrating because Mexico was a world leader in regulation, specifically talking about national AI strategies. Unfortunately, the last regime ended, and this actual administration hasn't improved or taken seriously the regulation process. This makes a whole lot of difference between Mexico and the U.S., where the regulation processes have been taken very seriously, and where we see, for example, the autoregulation and the judges really taking care of the evolving problems that such a dynamic technology implies. So we're expectant in this new regime that is starting in a few months. We are expectant to see if the presidency is taking the regulation problem, which is, by the way, the most complex problem regarding law and technology that I ever experienced. It's a very complex problem, but Mexico hasn't taken the efforts to even try to establish a position. We don't even have a position on the regulation realities that on one hand you have the horizontal regulation proposed by the European Union, and there's this vertical regulation where you see the applications, the specific applications of the technology, which is the proposal of the US. And then there's the other way of looking at regulation, which is the China regulation, which is very strict for protecting their socialist values. So I think that technology gives us a reason to have conversations like these, to applicate the opportunities of their capacities to solve complex problems. And it's always very exciting to see how we can establish these realities and harness the power of AI. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you, Pablo, and thank you to all four of our panelists. Please join me in giving them a round of applause. We will cede the floor to our next panel.
Of the Sam Houston State University Institute for Homeland Security, Diego Marroquin here to my left, a Berzin Foster North America Scholar here at the Wilson Center, Margaret Myers, Director of the Asia and Latin America Program at the Inter-American Dialogue, and joining us virtually, I think, any second now, Jason Martinez, Executive Director of the Mexico National Committee for Pacific Economic Cooperation. So let's get started. And I know we kind of touched on China and Mexico and the whole USMCA ordeal in the previous conversation earlier today. But Margaret, I wanted to start maybe with you after a second there for you to drink water, and helping us understand what China is doing in Mexico. When we talk about China's investment, of course, are we talking about infrastructure? Is it just manufacturing? Is it services? Is it something else? How difficult is it to keep track of what China is doing?
Well, thank you so much, Kenny, and thank you to the organizers for the very kind invitation to be here. I'm thrilled to offer some thoughts on this. So we at the Inter-American Dialogue, we track very closely Chinese engagement, not just in Mexico, but across the entirety of the region. And the story for a very long time was that there was not so much engagement with Mexico, especially in comparison to other countries in the region, South America, for instance, right? This was a relationship of competition rather than complementarity, in which there were certain challenges, for many years, political and economic, that really did shape the relationship in different ways than we saw elsewhere in the region. But nevertheless, over time, slowly but surely, we've seen an increase in investment, Chinese investment, by wide-ranging actors, state-owned enterprises, private companies, big, small, in Mexico. This has not been exclusively manufacturing-related investment, right? We've seen infrastructure. We saw a big port project, I believe it was in 2014, for example, some rail projects, right? Solar, certainly some services, offshore oil investment by CNOOC, for example, Dragon Mart investment. Some of these went fine. Others were ill-fated, very ill-fated in certain cases, and had an impact again on sort of the reputation of Chinese companies in Mexico and their future successes. And so this is not a new story, right? The China investment in Mexico story is something that we've seen for a number of years now. However, we are entering what is sort of a new phase in this relationship, and new meaning over the past 5 years, really. Since about 2017, 2018, we've seen a really marked increase in investment, not just in manufacturing, but mostly in manufacturing, and mostly in high-end manufacturing related to the automotive sector. So much so that over the past 5 years, Mexico became the third largest destination in Latin America for Chinese investment. And of the investment that we see, about 3/4 of that roughly is in high-end manufacturing, much of that again related to the automotive sector, components, for example, whether for EVs or other vehicles. In addition to other things too, right? You see some pharmaceutical-related manufacturing and other things too. So why? Why is this happening? Why are we seeing this boom? You all have talked about this, today already to some degree, but as others have said, Chinese companies are seeking access to Mexico's well-established industrial base, obviously, in pursuit of supply chain diversification, which is a trend that we're seeing across the board, whether it concerns automotive manufacturing or manufacturing of other types of things. And then, of course, also access to the North American market via USMCA provisions. Who is doing this? Most, or at least in this most recent phase, right? It's wide-ranging actors. Some are large state-owned enterprises. Some are very small companies that have been supplying, say, U.S. companies for a very long time, or others. But many had previously produced in China, right, and are moving some, or in some cases, all of their operations outside of the country, maybe all to Mexico, maybe partly to Mexico and partly to other places, to target other markets and to ensure access, and again, to diversify their own supply chains. As a result of all of this, I mean, given the nature of the investment right now, it's really focused, right? It's focused in a couple of states, right? There are investments all over the places I've mentioned, but if we're talking the big automotive boom, the manufacturing boom of late, you've got so much of it happening in Nuevo León and Coahuila, right? Those are the two places where if you were to see a heat map of all of this, they would be dark red, right? And then everything else would be a lighter shade of pink. I would say that, we'll talk a little bit, I would imagine, about some of the policies that have been implemented more recently to deal with this surge in investment. But, my sense is that it will continue. There are a lot of incentives for Chinese companies incentives based on, just general economic trends, right, for Chinese companies to continue engaging with Mexico. This is something also that the Chinese government is supporting wholeheartedly. There have been efforts, and one, anecdote I like to use is there is a system of rankings of the strength of diplomatic relations that China has with given countries in the region. The very highest achieving, countries, those that have the strongest diplomatic relations with China, in China's view, have what's called a comprehensive strategic partnership. And just very recently, under the López Obrador administration, right, there was an effort on the part of China and Mexico to at least talk about the possibility of upgrading that relationship, which would mean Mexico already has this high designation. That would mean placing Mexico above all others, right, in the region in terms of its ranking as a diplomatic partner, which would be hugely symbolic and I think indicative of a broader state-to-state level diplomatic interest in improving ties, which corresponds with, this surge in investment of late. And then, I'll stop here, but I want to just say, there's a really important question to ask here, right? We're seeing this surge in investment. And there is a lot of excitement about it, not here in Washington, but in Mexico, especially at the state level. A sense that there will be much to gain from surging investment in certain sectors. But a real question to ask is, how Chinese companies are investing. Is it simply bringing in, this production, bringing in, replicating precisely what was happening in Mexico? Or is there real investment on the ground in local capacity, in training, in technology transfer, in all of the things that would ensure that, states, that localities are able to upgrade economically in an effective manner? And that's a really important question to ask and to continue to analyze. So I'm going to leave it there.
No, thank you. And I think what we're all hearing is there's not just an increase in investment, but it's a diverse investment across industries, no favoritism, and then all sizes of companies. So it's something that's going to be hard to keep an eye on and something that we should be definitely tracking and having, developing a deeper understanding of what that could potentially mean. And I know we'll continue to talk about that. And then so on the previous panel on USMCA, there was a touch briefly on China potentially using Mexico as the Trojan horse and in a way of diverting and leveraging USMCA. So Diego, I'm going to move over to you as our USMCA guru here. When we think about maybe this notion of Chinese-made steel, aluminum, and other components that could be slapped together in Mexico and then finding their way up to the U.S. through USMCA, is that possible? Or is it maybe that what others argue about USMCA's labor content rules of origin that wouldn't allow China to leverage USMCA the way they would potentially want to, and maybe in things of electric vehicles and what rules of origin could mean about that? And I know, thinking about California's speed moving into the transition to electric vehicles, that is a potential market that's growing and that could be an opportunity. So what are your thoughts on that?
Thank you. No, I think Juan Carlos made really good points a few minutes ago. But I think I want to lead with one thing is that for the most part, USMCA is China-proof. And if we talk about cars specifically, there are many ways to show that. For example, if a company could be a Ukrainian company, could be a Chinese company, if they are already in Mexico or they want to set up shop in Mexico to export into the U.S., they need to meet a series of conditions. So, for example, 75% of the car's value need to come from Mexico, Canada, and the U.S. They need local labor. They need local inputs. On top of that, 40% of the car needs to be produced in high-wage factories. And on top of that, 70% of the steel and aluminum used needs to come from North America. What I'm trying to say here is that the bar is set really high for vehicle production in the region. It is very difficult to trick border customs into thinking that you're selling something that it is North American when in fact it is Chinese. If this hypothetical company meets these thresholds, that card in fact is a North American card, regardless of if the origin of the capital is Chinese or from another country. If they do not meet those requirements, that means that they will be treated as what they are. In this case, would be products of China, and they'll face the 27.5% tariff for regular vehicles or the 100% tariff for electrical vehicles. the point I'm trying to make here is that it is very difficult, both through USMCA and Section 301 tariffs. It is very difficult for Chinese car makers to put something together really quick and then with lots of imported parts and then send it into the US. It is, you need to show documentation, there are audits, and you just cannot ship things into the US and expect to gain tariff-free access if you don't meet those requirements. If you think of the North American vehicle market in North America, but specifically in the US, you can think of a high security lock. If you want to get the key, you need to meet the requirements, and the requirements are really, really high. And I think that's, we'll talk about numbers in a few more minutes, but I think most of the concerns are overblown, and we have to look at the real figures of where China is setting foot in Mexico and what are the medium and long-term implications for both the US and Mexico's national security interest and growth prospects for economic growth.
Just as a quick follow-up there, just because we're, again, talking about the electric vehicles, and you know how, like, batteries are massive at the moment with the current technology, and they're not produced within North America. So is that, like, a loophole that could be found while USMCA, or I guess US and Mexico, find their way into creating that supply chain here locally? Like, is that maybe a loophole that could be done? Like, we still have to import the batteries.
Yes, no, currently, like, as a region, we don't have the capacity to completely onshore the production of batteries. We don't have the processing capacity. We yet don't have all the raw materials and inputs, but USMCA already covers electrical vehicles. There's a threshold as well for advanced vehicles. That's what we call them in 2020. I think that we have a good opportunity in 2026 to review that language, for example, but that is covered under USMCA. So I don't think that would be a loophole for the moment.
Thanks for clarifying. And then going back to basics, maybe, Jason, I think, yeah, there you are. Why does China want to invest in Mexico to begin with? Like, is Mexico really providing that Trojan horse, or a specific set of resources and opportunities to come to the U.S. through them? Or what can we say about, like, the Biden administration's tariff policy and the Trump administration before that and potentially after, to encourage China to look for, alternative ways to get into the U.S. market?
Thank you, Kenya. And also I would like to thank Lila and the Wilson Center for the invitation, and also for their flexibility in order to have me transmitting virtually. So regarding your questions, first of all, I would like to mention that the backdoor idea, I think it's more a misconception regarding our bilateral relation. I mean, what is real is that Mexico and the U.S. have strong ties that have been strengthened in the last 3 decades or so, in many aspects, beginning with what we have achieved in trade and investment, most of all through NAFTA first, and then now with USMCA. And we can refer now to a solid regional integration, mostly due to the participation that we have in productive chains, such as the automotive, for example, which is the main one. And this has been facilitated by our shared border, which puts Mexico in a privileged position compared with other countries that are willing to access North American market. That is the case of the Asian countries, which are eager to produce within Mexican territory in order to comply with the production requirements from USMCA, like the rules of origin to begin with. I would also like to point out that Mexico, in parallel to the strengthening of our bilateral relations and also the relation with Canada and the US, Mexico has been in parallel pursuing a strategy to get more closer and to diversify our relation towards those countries in the other side of the Pacific. And notably, during 30 years or so, Mexico has achieved, for example, CPTPP with other 10 countries or 10 economies from that part of the world, and also a bilateral a bilateral treaty with Japan in 2005. So nowadays, China has going back to China, has a very important presence in Mexico, mostly in the investment area. China has been no exception in these countries that have this interest in doing business in Mexico, but also to bring investment. And this has been increased or have been accelerated after the last two administrations in the U.S. Since all the measures that have been taken by the U.S. government in order to reduce the presence of Chinese products here and investment here in this side of the Pacific. And well, China has been doing some actions in order to produce here in Mexico and also to export into the U.S. market. And well, going to the or answering some of the questions that Margaret just mentioned in her presentation, where is that the investment from China going? Well, this investment has been diversified ever since, and we can identify at least three modalities. The first one is in large-scale infrastructure projects, such as refineries, the interoceanic corridor in the southern part of Mexico, and announcement of industrial parks. We also have in the sector of green energy, passenger transportation, the railways, for example, where China has gained experience in other parts of the world with their One Belt and One Road initiative that is implementing since 2013. And in second place, we have the extracting industries, as those in the mining sector, including their interest in strategic materials such as lithium for the fabrication of batteries. And the third one that has been already mentioned is manufacturing sectors such as automotive, electric, and electronic, including telecommunication and information technologies, where Chinese presence has increased with their incursion also as suppliers of largest industries. The latter still has a lesser participation in comparison with the previous, but could have an impact in local SMEs here in Mexico. Nevertheless, the U.S. is still Mexico's largest investor, and the reality is one of a deep economic interdependence. In this sense, Mexico needs to reach a balance between maintaining and increasing the investment that receives from the U.S., from which a huge portion of our economy activities depend, and also trying to catch more investment from China, allocating it in projects such as in the south of Mexico, where there is a possibility to inject dynamism to the economy of such region. To this end, Mexico needs to be very cautious and make an effort to develop a proper regulatory framework to begin with, to at least have a better control and close follow-up of that investment that is coming from China, starting by identifying the actual amount of investment. To this day, Mexico hasn't registered exactly the amount of investment that comes from China, since it also comes from Chinese companies that are established in the U.S., for example. And we also need instruments such as reinvigorating the investment treaty from 2009 and other related measures which allow Chinese investment to be productive, and that also be translated into technology transfer and development for Mexico. I would like to stop here to continue with the discussion later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. And I think we are all on the same page on keeping that balance between the U.S. and Mexico's bilateral relationship and maintaining it and prioritizing it, while also allowing Mexico and obviously the U.S. to attract investment from other countries, including in this case China, into Mexico. And Margaret had already also pointed out the importance of also keeping track of all of this and the data and really understanding it, and so did the panel on USMCA before us. Margaret, maybe you also talked about incentives that Mexico was offering China. Maybe you can complement this a little bit more.
Sure. Yeah. And if I could, I mean, just sort of add to some of the important points that were just made. I mean, I think in terms of understanding China's motivations, right? We've talked about the reasons why we might see enhanced engagement in wide-ranging sectors, but especially in high-end manufacturing. This is well established. But it's really critical to understand and to follow China's own trends in industrial policy, right? And right now we're seeing China prioritizing, I mean, it's called a bunch of different things in Chinese documents. You can call it new infrastructure, you can call it the new three, right, which includes EVs, solar, and batteries, right? These are the things. This is an absolute imperative in China. And so we need to, the point, what China is trying to achieve here, obviously companies have their own incentives, they have their own shareholders in certain cases, and they're trying to achieve profit depending upon, what type of company they are. But, for China writ large, right, the message is go forth and dominate these industries, right? Establish a presence in these industries, establish maximum competitiveness, and sell at a very low rate in order to establish a market, right? And a footprint in countries and markets where maybe there isn't one quite yet. And so we tend to, I think, here in the United States, view this as a U.S.-centric, it's very U.S.-centric, right, our view. This is a U.S. problem. They're trying to access the U.S. market. There'll be an influx of Chinese cars, EVs, and others right into the U.S. But another very big part of this, and that may very well be part of the interest, right? But a very big part of the interest is establishing a market in Latin America, right? And that's what we're seeing. A big part of this is indeed doing that. So, if BYD were to establish itself, for example, in Mexico, as it has in other countries and in the region, perhaps there would be interest in selling to the United States, although as we've determined, that's not really an option at the moment. But the Mexican market is also critical, as are adjacent markets. And, when you look at the numbers, EV sales in Latin America they've grown threefold between 2022 and 2023, right? It just looks like this. And this is a response to all of the policy that's being implemented at the moment, in a sense that China needs to double down on the global south and global south markets, right? And this is what we're seeing across the board. It's not an EV specific story. It's in all of these areas, in all of these sort of high-tech innovation related sectors, and we'll continue to see more of that looking ahead. In terms of incentives, it's really hard to track this data. Why? Because FDI data is just notoriously difficult to track. Projects are developed, they're developed quietly, or else they fall off the map and nobody knows about it. So keeping track of this is something you have to do continuously. There is obviously information out there in Mexico at the state level and at the national level. Those numbers don't always correspond. They're not always in aggregate. And so it is difficult to monitor that as well. And the other biggest problem, I think, in tracking all of this is the shelter companies. So you have a lot of Chinese companies, including state-owned enterprises, that invest through shelter companies, to not necessarily to not be counted, right, but because they need help navigating Mexican regulatory environment and legal environment, and so they do this. But then those statistics aren't counted in official statistics. So, it's very likely that the numbers of Chinese investment are much higher than what we are officially estimating. And then in terms of incentives, it's... there has been a real focus on this, on not providing incentives for Chinese manufacturers and in Mexico to establish themselves in Mexico, and indeed some agreements at the national level. But, I think the incentives, whether they're monetary incentives or tax incentives or whatever they may be, there are other incentives at play, right, that are going to continue to drive, and by that I mean the broader economic landscape, right, that will continue, and China's industrial policy that will continue to push Chinese companies into Mexico in wide-ranging innovation-related sectors. And indeed, this was mentioned, there are a number of special economic zones, for example, industrial zones that are very attractive to China. Huofushan is one of them, right, where there is a lot of Chinese involvement. There are others too, and they have their own particular incentives, right, that are not China-specific by any means, but will certainly incentivize more investment in those areas.
Thank you. And then so shifting gears a little bit into the U.S. economy, internal economy, and supply chains, Michael, not over to you. Let's talk about what the impact of this investment may be on supply chains. If you can maybe walk us over about how Chinese investment could impact, if anything, supply chains. And also thinking about, we're talking about the border, but the border region has its own, integrated supply chains. I'm from San Diego, so that alone is a $2.5 billion annual integrated supply chains, and shifting over to $270 billion in gross domestic product. But your thoughts on that?
Thank you. When Leila told me I was going to be a panelist, I said I thought I was going to be a moderator, so I got a little panicked. I also know my mom's watching, so hopefully I do well, Mom. Thanks.
Mine too.
Yeah, yours too? Okay, yeah. So my name is Michael Asplin. I'm the Executive Director of the Institute for Homeland Security out of Texas. And the focus of our institute is on critical infrastructure protection strategies as it relates to 5 areas. And our focus areas are transportation, energy, chemical, healthcare, and water and wastewater. The good news is for all the panelists that I've heard throughout the day, all of those topics, I think with the exception of healthcare, have all been mentioned at some point. We held a series of roundtables to do a needs assessment in Eagle Pass, Laredo, and Weslaco. And we asked them, what are your concerns specific to supply chain issues? And how can we as an institute start conducting research and maybe come up with best practices or policy recommendations to help mitigate some of those challenges? And what we heard from them, and I think it ties right back to the topic that we're having right now, is number one, it was supply chain challenges tied to transportation. If we see an emergence and an increase in manufacturing controlled by Chinese companies, we're going to see more impacts on trucking and the availability of specifically drivers. We're seeing a shortage of U.S. drivers. We also have a constraint in that to drive onto ports of entry, you have to be 21 years of age to have that commercial driver's license. That's what I'm being told. And in the state of Texas, you just need to be 18. So there's now a need for transfer of goods for depending on what your license status is. And so the increase of goods coming across is going to create some problems. We also have an aging infrastructure. This was another one that came up. And the impact on roads, if you've been to Texas and lived through a storm, I'm from California, so I didn't really understand what rain was until I got up there to Texas, or got to Texas. But again, very vulnerable to damage and disruptions as to what's going on. Another topic that came up was the presence China has with components. And talking to industry leaders in Texas, frankly, I was surprised that there are some pieces of equipment necessary for commerce of which the majority of the components are made in China. So when you think about if they wanted to create a presence and there was a need for something tied to the electrical system or fuel systems, they could provide those parts to those companies that had an interest with China and not for others. So we're concerned about those types of things. I heard the discussion about investment into small and medium-sized businesses. So maybe foreign investment can't get into a large corporation. Well, they just start buying up small and medium-sized businesses that are become eventually folded into larger corporations, and you can backdoor get a presence. I got a head shaking yes, so it's always good to have that affirmation from the group. And then finally, I'll just wrap this up, is that we are intending to launch a research project in collaboration with you guys, the Mexico Institute, and my colleague Alberto Villarreal is in the back. We're going to hold a webinar on August 2nd to present more detailed findings of the work that we've done on our collaboration and look for opportunities to partner for folks who might want to be part of this research, specifically looking at the unique nature of Texas border communities, and that the topics that I've just described and we've talked about on the panel, yes, they're consistent across the board, but what we keep hearing is, look, there's uniqueness about how we do business, what we do because we're on the border, and how do we fashion and put together policies or business practices that are specific to that region. And when disruptions occur, do organizations have continuity of operation plans? Have they looked at where they're vulnerable in terms of supply chain management? And the answer we're getting back is they don't even think about it if you're a medium or small size business. So I hope that was helpful.
Yes, and actually, so that your mom can hear more from you, can you walk us through some of the national security concerns that U.S. policymakers might have with this investment? And maybe just to follow up with everyone, what other concerns can we think of and beyond foreign direct investment? Like what else is that could be?
So you asked me a question that I don't think I was prepared to answer, and I don't think, and that's fine. I think from where I sit talking to industry, I don't hear the policy issue. I hear the getting business done issue. And I hear when we ask direct questions like, well, what if you had a cyber attack? So maybe this is where it ties over to policy, is are you ready for that? Are you ready to have your business disrupted? And I was thinking about cyber attacks, the Colonial Pipeline being one that comes to mind. It prevented, I believe it was 12, 15 states from getting fuel and those types of supplies through that particular pipeline. So I would, and again, I'm just kind of vamping here, but I think what we hope to accomplish is, as we identify these vulnerabilities and issues, we would want to provide that data to policymakers so that they could craft legislation to help protect business. And when I think about the trade agreement that's there and talking about, hey, that's solid, and this is areas that they can. I think that you said that that's protected, that China can't get into because of the way that that's fashioned. That might be an area we can focus on.
No, of course. I have a lot of questions here, but I want to break the ice and actually open it up for the audience to ask some questions before we get. I have plenty, but just in case anyone of you has a question to bring forward on the back. Maybe just project.
Muy buenos días, Francisco Alvarez, independent researcher at Georgetown. There's a lot of focus in this conversation on durable goods and like the high-end manufacturing supply chains. I actually want to pivot a bit to the agriculture and concerns over human rights abuses, especially pressures on laborers. Speaking as a Mexican, there are often concerns about, two examples. In the North Mexico, we have the big corporate berry farms where there are a lot of concerns over the treatment of migrant workers who come from Central America or Southern Mexico, and then find abuse on those facilities. Closer to my home in Jalisco, there are concerns over the aguacate supply chains and the pressures that those place. I'm wondering, within U.S. MCA, what kind of mechanisms are there in place for I would say companies in the U.S., for instance, to say, hey, we're concerned about human rights abuses in our supply chain. Maybe we won't accept products from certain growers or certain providers. And then on the flip side, could you cite some examples of industry-led initiatives to say, maybe these suppliers are not going to be included in the supply chain until they pass X, Y, and Z. So thank you again.
Yeah, take it.
Good try. Yeah. Well, I don't know where's the China piece in that, but I can talk about labor for sure. Just finishing up the mom talk. My mom just texted me saying that I should stand up straight when I talk. So.
Reminder for everyone.
Wait. I'll check
Yes.
too. Hold on.
We're talking about labor. And I think I can link it to the North American elephant in the room, China. USMCA is very strict when it comes to labor requirements. If you want to export into Canada, the US, or Mexico, you need to meet strict labor standards. If there's any potential violation of collective bargaining rights, association rights, if people get illegally terminated, for example, they can trigger this mechanism called the rapid response mechanism under USMCA. Compared to NAFTA, we didn't have an enforcement mechanism for labor violations. Now with this, for example, we've seen 20 cases so far. Over 20,000 Mexican workers have received significant wage increases. They got back to their jobs after being illegally terminated, for example. There's been trainings both for employers and employees about their rights. And I mean, they have now Mexican workers or firms that want to export into the US and Canada have this mechanism. And I think that's a really positive development. And if we looked at it from the Chinese perspective, for example, both the US and Mexico have adopted legislation to prohibit the importation of goods that have been associated with forced labor. So we've talked a lot about like forced labor in China, for example, the province of Xinjiang. If any of those inputs were to try to be exported into the US or Mexico, you just couldn't, because you have to show documentation and there's plenty of audits. So that's another loophole that's not a loophole, and that's covered under USMCA.
Thank you. We may have just one more, but depending on the time.
Thank you, Sandy. Russ Jones, I'm a customs broker along the U.S.-Mexico border. And August 2nd, the next round of Section 301 sanctions is going to go into place, applying to something like 500 additional tariff items in the U.S. tariff. And working with CBP, I understand their concerns about manipulation of the rules of origin on textiles, metal products.
Oh, there it was.
And others. And with respect to the labor issues as well as other dumping and issues, circumventing those restrictions and additional duties in the U.S. by fabricating subcomponents and other materials at a lower level in foreign countries. Are using a lot of textiles are coming out of Central and South America, and we're seeing that the quantity of steel products coming out of Mexico far exceeds Mexico's production of steel products. So, you know, I'm not a mathematician, but you have to wonder, right? So, what do you see in the next round of USMCA during the review about closing some of those loopholes and tightening some of the rules of origin so these types of manipulations cannot happen, and companies in China can't go through third and fourth and fifth parties to ultimately get products into the United States and avoid those?
Maybe?
Okay. Yeah, don't look at me.
But I don't want to.
Oh, Jason? I keep forgetting that he's here. Comment? No? Okay, then you'll have to take it.
I guess I have no chance. So, I know.
Yes, that's right, sounds right.
Yes, I think that will definitely come up in the review. I want to talk about the review if we get enough time. But the risk of raising rules of origin there's a risk if you raise rules of origin and those domestic requirements, you can raise them up to a level where both Mexico, the US, and Canada are not competitive anymore. And that's something that we're seeing the initial signs. For example, in auto manufacturing, there are plenty of companies that are building cars in Mexico and Canada, but they're not exporting into the US through USMCA. Because again, the 70% requirement from aluminum, the wage requirements as well, there are plenty of companies that are maybe not yet are able to meet those requirements. So I fear that if we push too hard on those things, we will actually be hurting the North American auto industry overall. These stricter requirements haven't yet delivered on increased auto production. I think in the last 3 years there was a study by the U.S. Congress saying that less than 2,000 cars were produced after the increase in rules of origin requirements, and that's something we should definitely have a careful conversation, because if we raise the standards too much, there's going to be plenty of companies that are not going to be able to catch up in time.
Thank you. And then also just wrapping up, and what we're hearing from each of the panelists here is also keeping an eye of what's happening and not losing our sight of, you know, again, finding that balance, as Jason said, of maintaining the U.S.-Mexico relationship, but allowing Mexico and the U.S. to also leverage other economic opportunities elsewhere. And maybe also strategizing, having a more frank conversation about whether there's concerns that we need to address as a bilateral bloc, such as, you know, just hearing recently from Ildefonso Bajardo, which is the USMCA negotiator for Mexico, and advising on the limiting Chinese investment in key industries such as IT or AI, defense, aerospace, and by prioritizing like the loyalty between the U.S. and Mexico as we go forward with USMCA, and while also maintaining that global competitiveness. So I know better than keeping you all from lunch. So we're going to stop here and thank all of our esteemed panel of experts here for joining us today.
If you're interested in
Welcome to your home. Well, soon to be not as close of a home. But thank you.
I don't know what Leela knows that I don't know, but apparently I'm being fired after this event.
About time.
About time, exactly. I mean, it's amazing I've lasted for 11 years, really, isn't it? I mean, my God, the liabilities alone. Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for coming back after lunch. It's been an extraordinary day, full of very, very interesting panels. Lunch, I think, was terrific. Great to have Rachel Pointer here and hearing her expound on the bilateral relationship. We now have an opportunity to talk about the election that took place on June 2nd, what that means for Mexican politics and what it means for bilateral relations. As Leila intimated, this is in fact not only my last panel at the Wilson Center, this is my last day working here. And so it's been... It was my birthday yesterday. It's all coming together. Thank you very much. And it's been an extraordinary ride. And I just want to say this, that I am so happy that Leila is continuing the extraordinary work of the Mexico Institute. She's a terrific leader, fantastic to have somebody who has so much energy at the helm, also to have somebody who is young, somebody, and this is relevant in the current context, to have a woman running the Mexico Institute. Very, very important. I'm delighted to see that. Now, our task at hand with three extraordinary panelists here today is to talk about the new administration in Mexico. We have with us Luis Carlos Ugalde, who is the founder of Integralia Consultores and the former president of the National Electoral Institute in Mexico, a great friend of the Mexico Institute and the Wilson Center. Thank you, Luis Carlos. Luis Rubio, who is a global fellow of the Mexico Institute, a board member of the Mexico Institute, and the former president of COMEXI, as well as the president of CIDAC, Mexico Como Vamos. And Evalúa, perdóname, Mexico Evalúa, and Alma Caballero, managing director of McClarty for Northern Latin America practice. Alma, great to have you here as well. When you've been in this game long enough, everybody ends up being a friend, and it's just lovely to have that it's so familiar. So let's kick off. Luis Carlos, I wonder if I can turn to you first of all. And I wonder if you could talk to us about the election itself that took place on June 2nd. We all know the results of that election. But how did the election authorities perform in that election? Some of us were lucky enough to be there in the official capacity as observers. But how did you see the election actually being organized? Because it was a hugely controversial question about whether or not the INE would be able to organize this massive election, historic election in Mexico. And secondly, what does the result tell us about the success of the outgoing administration, of the López Obrador administration, in building and maintaining support with the Mexican people?
Well, first of all, from an organizational point of view, the Elections Institute did a good job. It has done so the same for a very long period of time, 30 years or more doing the same job, and it is well done. And the problem of this election is that, having said that, is that this was the most unequal election in Mexican history and the most violent. And the INE and the Electoral Tribunal play a role in allowing, especially López Obrador as president, to violate the Constitution many, many times. Why was this so unequal? Because the president was the speaker of the campaign, of the official campaign. Because the Constitution was amended in 2007. I was president of the Elections Institute at the time. And because of all the demands and the complaints of López Obrador at the time, when he lost the first presidential election in which he ran, the Constitution was amended to prohibit and to ban public officials from talking about elections. And López Obrador did that as never, ever had done in the past. So this is the first one. The second one is the use of social programs for electoral purposes. And for a very long period of time during the pre-era, the opposition at the time, many of them now members of Morena, play a role in constraining the ability of the government, of the pre-governments, to use public resources for political purposes. And now Morena did that as never before had been done. And the third one is the role of violence. This is the most violent election, not only because 39 candidates were killed, that is important, but the most relevant aspect of this is that local criminal organizations are penetrating from the ground up the political system. And this, of course, creates the sense of them funding some campaigns, pinpointing who the candidates are. So in some sense, elections are already defined even before election day in some areas of the country. And so I think this is the biggest win of a presidential candidate in Mexican history. Nobody doubts about the mandate, the popular mandate and the democratic mandate of Mrs. Sheinbaum. Of course, that is true. Nobody can challenge that. But at the same time, the conditions of these elections are the worst that Mexico has ever had. Now, this is the result of a López Obrador very successful political tactics out of his administration. Of course, the Mexican electorate is very happy about the result, very optimistic. Never ever before has the social mood in Mexico been so positive. So people is happy. The electorate thinks we are going in the right direction, but the election was very unequal.
So I want to push you a little bit on what you were talking about in terms of the social programs. Clientelism has been a feature of Mexican politics for well, at least decades. Let's say over a century. Let's say. To what extent is this a case of López Obrador and the current administration just being better at this than previous administrations? Because in my memory, you've seen the use of social programs many, many times, and you said that the opposition had actually held them back from doing more of that.
I think it is legitimate that any government in the world can promote social programs and then request or demand that those programs are part of the ability of an administration to pursue the common good. Yeah. The problem in Mexico at this moment is that certain rules which establishes that you cannot coerce the vote of people or you cannot threaten the public that if they don't vote for you, then those programs are going to disappear. Mm-hmm. That is the problem. And the second problem is that there are about 30,000 officials working to administer these social programs, servidores de la nación. Mm-hmm. And most of these people work indeed as a parallel party to Morena, supporting the mobilization of voters. And that creates an unequal structure that could impede to have free elections any more time in the future. If you don't change this, if you don't constrain this ability of the administration to use this infrastructure, free elections will never happen again in Mexico.
That's a pretty stunning realization that democracy is under threat to that extent. Luis,
I mean, there is free vote in some sense, of course. Nobody is questioning that, yeah. But if half of the budget is used for political purposes and clientelistic purposes, then the freedom is very much constrained.
Yeah, there's two parts to free and fair elections. They have to be free and they have to be fair. And yeah. Luis, turning to you, let's talk a little bit about the overwhelming support received by President-elect Sheinbaum and, of course, the Morena party. I wonder if you could run through sort of where we stand on that for those people who haven't been following it closely. But here's my question for you. Are we now firmly back in the territory of single-party rule in Mexico? And the follow-up question, how on earth does the opposition come back after this?
Thank you, Duncan. First, I'd say that, of course, this was an overwhelming landslide, but still 40% of the population voted against. And so there's a sizable opposition that will remain in place. No question that Morena will dominate the political scene in the short term. But I think we have to keep things in perspective. First of all, as Luis Carlos rightly said, the candidate in this election was López Obrador. The whole campaign, Sheinbaum campaign was incredibly professional and well structured, but it was meant to maximize López Obrador and minimize her. So that's an issue that will now come to the fore in a significant way. But obviously it was successful in its own terms. In fact, I think I would argue that all that López Obrador did during his term was prepare for this election. The whole structure of social programs and the like were built for this moment. And I would add to what Luis Carlos just said, that a key difference with previous governments was that they designed social programs in a way that was non-political or non-partisan. Whereas in this case, the money was delivered in cash in the name of López Obrador. So that is a completely different issue. It's legitimate for the government to develop programs, but not necessarily in this way. So to your question, yes, Morena will clearly dominate the political scene, but I don't see it as of today in its current structure. It cannot become a dominant force in the way that PRI was in its time. This is largely because it is not a political party; it is a movement, and that's a good description, even though it's difficult to nail down exactly what a movement means. But the one thing that is important is that it doesn't have structures of discipline the way political parties, by definition, have to have. The only factor of cohesion and contention is an individual, and that's López Obrador. So once and if he's out of the picture, Morena is going to fragment the way its predecessors fragmented into tribes, as I used to call them in PRD, now the extinct PRD, which brings us to the issue of the relationship between Claudia Sheinbaum and López Obrador, which is going to be paramount in the next several weeks. And the way that relationship evolves is going to be critical for her government. The opposition clearly is in disarray. One has to start with the obvious. As of today, they still don't understand why Fox won in 2000 or why they lost in 2018. And the structure of incentives that the electoral law provides makes it very difficult for political parties to actually be interested in winning an election. They are interested in winning enough seats in Congress because that's where the money comes from. The number of seats determines the budget that the government pays to the political parties. As long as they have a large enough budget, that's enough for them. So that allows for pretty bad leadership to become the norm rather than the exception in the political parties. It's not by chance that the good leaders of the opposition took place in the 80s and 90s, not in the 2000s. And that's because of this structure of budgetary budgets, which ironically was a demand from the opposition, from Porfirio Muñoz Ledo, then president of PRD. But the consequences have been dire. Still, I wouldn't cancel the future for the opposition. Mexico is in my view, for a pretty complex future in the next couple of years. Morena is going to be paying the price of all the odd decisions that López Obrador made. There are enormous fiscal constraints. They will have no leeway in that. There's the issue that didn't come to that the position that Xochitl Gálvez couldn't turn into a wedge issue, which is security, but it'll come to the fore, and inevitably it will have to be dealt with. Then USMCA has to be negotiated, and the most important one is that Mexico will now, I think, come to the realization that there's a very strong institutional absence that will have to be dealt with.
Thank you, Luis. I mean, you listed some of the, I guess, the constraints on the new government there and the challenges that they're going to be that the government will face, and that brings me to you, Alma, which is that since the election we've seen considerable turbulence and instability in the Mexican peso. Mm-hmm. We've seen that there has been a lot of anxiety on the Mexican stock market. How do you view the relationship between the incoming administration and the private sector? Let's begin, first of all, with sort of the Mexican private sector and then talk about the investor community from abroad. How do you see that playing out as we approach October the 1st?
Great. Thank you, Duncan, for the question, and thank you to Lila and to the team for the invitation to join this panel. Before answering your question, Duncan, I'd like to just provide a little bit of facts based on what Luis Carlos and Luis just mentioned right now in terms of the current state of Mexico.
First of all, you have 71% of Mexican households benefiting from at least one of the social programs that were mentioned. You had 111% increase in real minimum wage since 2018. And you have 84% increase in remittances from 2018 to now. So what that means is, of course, the Mexican citizens are happy because they also have much more cash in their pocket. Now, whether that will translate into votes or how they spend that money, that's another question to be answered. But I do think that I like to provide just that color, that fact behind where the current state is. In terms of the relationship between the public and the private sector under the new leadership of Claudia Sheinbaum, I would say that the market reacted the day after the election happened with a 4% appreciation in the peso. And that was not because of a surprise of the victory of Claudia Sheinbaum. Everybody was expecting for that outcome to result. But it was much more because of the tight margin that the Morena party and its allies were able to gain in the Senate. They are very likely to fall 4 seats short of achieving the 2/3 threshold needed to amend the Constitution. And that, of course, creates a not only landslide victory in terms of the executive, but the overwhelming power that she will gain into office on October 1st in controlling the legislature and the implications that it has to the judiciary, given the judiciary reform that was presented as part of the 18 constitutional amendments that were put forth in February by the current president. So that is one of the potential explanations of the reaction of the market. Now, since then, what has been very well received has been the technical background in the appointments that have been announced, particularly from the cabinet. So last Thursday, we saw the first 6 names of the new cabinet that will be assuming a role, and they're very technical in background. They're very open in terms of engaging with the private sector. That is welcomed. And then today we're expecting, I think a few moments ago, the other 6 appointments were made, which is also very welcomed in terms of their backgrounds, their experience, and what they will be also able to ensure to bridge the gap between the private and the public sector that was so present during this administration. When we look into the investment community and how they see Mexico, I like to zoom out a little bit and structure my remarks in 2 buckets. First, the structural tailwinds that Claudia Sheinbaum will inherit in terms of Mexico. What are those structural tailwinds? Mexico is the world's 12th largest economy. It has a $1.7 trillion economy, the 2nd largest in Latin America. It has expected growth of this year of 2%, next year of 2.5%. You have rising levels of FDI, which have been record, $36 billion in FDI from last year, 38% of which come directly from the United States. It has a unique geographic location, not only being part of North America, but also of Latin America and ties to Asia and Europe. And a point that I like to stress is the young, dynamic population that characterizes Mexico. You have 50% of its 130 million citizens younger than the age of 30. So that, of course, to the market, when looking into what Mexico promises in terms of economic and dynamism, that is very attractive. You also have a highly open global economy, with 14 free trade agreements, granting it a preferential access to 50 countries. It, of course, becoming the largest trading partner to the United States. But at the core of it is what has characterized the macroeconomic stability of Mexico is the autonomy of the central bank. It is a flexible exchange rate, is the inflation moving towards target, and also the low debt to GDP ratio when comparing it to other what we call nearshoring competitors is quite at a healthy rate. So that is a tailwind that she will, I would say, benefit from, and that as the investment community is looking into Mexico, provides great promise. However, there is another story as well, which is the current headwinds. And what are those current headwinds? Are the authoritarian tendencies that have been part of the populist approach of the current government in terms of a democratic decline that we're seeing and that were already expressed before. You have the institutional decay and the concentration of power that have been so present in some of the destabilizing policies that the López Obrador administration has done. You have the dismantling of technical capacities in some of the key agencies within the government, not only within the Ministry of Economy, but also within the competition authorities, within the CRE, for example, the energy regulator. So that, of course, has affected the checks and balances that have been so crucial to the private sector when looking into Mexico. You have the strained public-private relationships, of course, that have been dominated not only by the actions, but by the narrative that the president himself knows that he controls from the daily mañaneras, where you have around 500,000 people tuning in on YouTube alone. So he sets the agenda, and he is also part of the voice that has led to strained public-private relationships and led to a much more challenging and volatile environment to do business in Mexico. With that, of course, we cannot overlook the huge Achilles heel in terms of the structural headwinds, which is security and impunity. Because it's not only a fact that you have the cost of doing business in Mexico. Around 25% of companies have been victims of crime in Mexico, and around 60% consider their main operational challenge to be security and operating in the country. With that, of course, you have it's important when we look at security and the implications that it has to the private sector, that it's not a homogeneous issue. You have around 50% of the security concentrated in 6 states in the country. So, of course, that is also has to be addressed. And finally, the growing involvement of the armed forces that extends beyond the security responsibilities and now are part of the economic activities that has led to a reduce in civilian oversight. And, of course, that creates a much more challenging environment to operate, though not impossible.
Thank you, Alma, for that very complete answer there. The first round of questions was your analysis of what's happened. I now am going to ask you to look into your crystal ball and to the future. And Luis Carlos, let me begin with you. We've already mentioned that September is going to be a crucial month for Mexico, a crucial month for the Congress, for outgoing President López Obrador. What do you see happening in September? What do you think is the most likely outcome? Will the reform agenda go through? If so, will AMLO get everything that he wants? We've already seen him scaling back, at least in his public declarations, from the 20 items on his agenda to 5, what he says are his priorities. What do you see? What do you think will actually happen when the new Congress takes its seats?
There will be a judiciary reform in September, no matter what. And López Obrador himself is going to publish the reform, and he's going to celebrate. This is going to be the grand finale of López Obrador. That is his path to history in his own conception. So that is going to happen. The question is the scope of the reform. At this moment, in the transition team of Sheinbaum, I suppose they are trying to constrain the toxic nature of this reform. And basically, the main question is the scope of the election of the members of the judiciary by popular vote. If you are going to keep that at the top in the Supreme Court, if you elect only those 11 justices by popular vote, or if you go down to the whole structure, there are about 1,800 jueces and magistrates who could be elected by popular vote, and those are federal judges. There are local judges at the same time, and this proposal by López Obrador includes that local constitutions are amended as well to elect local judges by popular vote as well. So I suppose that if you keep the reform just at the Supreme Court, the damage could be constrained. And you at the same time can include some requirements to run for the charge. For example, levels of education, experience, so that anybody can, there would be 30 candidates according to the López Obrador original bill. If those 30 candidates are basically good candidates, then the risk is low. So that is the question. And the second is the implementation phase. Are you going to do that in 1 year, in 5 years? What is going to happen with those cases pending in the offices of these judges? Imagine if those 1,800 judges today know that they are going to be fired within a year, the corruption that could erupt within the system. All cases would be up for sale, of course, because all these people would be simply out of office, out of a job. So that is, the transition period is very fundamental. So this is the first case, the judiciary. And one question I put on the table is what would the weight of the U.S. administration and of the USMCA establishment be in constraining or sending signals that this is a bad idea for the 2026 sunset review? And the other reforms on the table would be not of this level of importance, but there is another one in terms of congressional re-election, but the rest is not really very relevant in terms of the impact on the Mexican political system.
Just one very quick follow-up there, Luis Carlos. We heard President López Obrador this morning at his Mañanera talking about, once again, the budget of the National Electoral Institute and saying that it only needs half that amount of money to be able to do its job. Do you think that's something that we're going to come back to time and time again before he leaves office?
Yes, but it's not part of the priorities of Mrs. Sheinbaum. I don't see why Sheinbaum should make a reform to the Elections Institute once she has won with these numbers. I mean, that doesn't make sense. I don't see her as trying to make an electoral reform in the short term. At the same time, López Obrador wants to reduce the financing of parties in Mexico. That would be a very bad idea in these moments in which the opposition is so weak. And finally, López Obrador wants to disappear the representation of members of Congress by proportional representation. Very bad idea at this moment. So I don't see Sheinbaum. I think Sheinbaum is a common sense woman. She has more emotional intelligence than López Obrador. So I think she's going to be more responsible in this aspect. I don't see why she would want to go with these crazy ideas. And finally, let me tell you, I think that Sheinbaum would have wanted to delay this judiciary reform.
Yeah.
This is creating a lot of noise for her initial administration, but she cannot maneuver López Obrador out of that goal.
Thank you, Luis Carlos. Luis, when I was running the Mexico Institute, I was very, very lucky to work with you on, to see you write and then publish 3 books on the issue of governance in Mexico, the rule of law, the problem of power, etc. In this era of Morena dominance, with a president who has received 60% of the popular vote, to what extent are we going to see governance capacity in Mexico increased because of that legitimacy, because of the control of the Congress, because of the control of state legislatures as well as the governorships? And to what extent at the same time are we going to see the rule of law increasingly being threatened by that dominance?
Well, I think that's the single most important issue of Mexico. And I don't think this election changes the nature of the challenge, but it will have to come to grips with it. Unfortunately, I don't think that the issue is as such the rule of law. I think that the issue is basic stability. And in a way, this is the day of reckoning for things that have not been done over the past several decades. This is not only about López Obrador. Mexico formally and constitutionally is a federal state because it copied the structure of governance of the U.S., but it has always been a centralized political system. The PRI was the only real institution of the 20th century, and it was the mechanism that allowed for stability, for governance, for transition of power to take place peacefully. And PRI ended simply because it was successful in its own terms, and the economy began to grow, and the country changed and grew and whatnot. It was supposed to be replaced by democratic governance with the democratic institutions that both Alma and Luis Carlos have described, and others. And unfortunately, those proved, or most of those have proven to not have been true institutions in the sense of constraining power, which is the point of an institution. So they were victims of, most of them have been victims of López Obrador and his ability to neutralize them or to simply destroy them. And the 2 or 3 remaining are in his sights. I would say something slightly different from what Luis Carlos mentioned. I think that the problem of Claudia Sheinbaum today is that she doesn't have the capacity to constrain. He said so in the judicial reform, but I'm not sure that that's true, that's not equally true in other cases. In fact, she is still not president-elect. And I don't think that there's an issue. I think that the reason why there are only 5 magistrates in the electoral tribunal is because 6 votes are needed for certification. The reason is that he planned this in case his candidate lost. But the point is that she's still not president-elect, and there's a limit of September 6th, I think, for that to happen. So that's another issue looming, and she cannot move too far because he holds the keys, at least until then. Why things haven't fallen apart in the absence of a structure like PRI or the democratic institutions? I think that the answer is that simply that the power of the personality of López Obrador and his political skills made that possible. But I'm not sure that that's sustainable looking heretofore. And that's why the reforms of September are so transcendent. What will be left after this administration with a president that is not charismatic the way López Obrador is? My sense is that the only alternative she has is to build institutions, paradoxically so. But that's, I think, the challenge, and it's not obvious that could be easily done, given the nature of Morena and the fact that she, at least as of today, doesn't control Morena. And controlling Morena is going to be a feat in and of itself, for the reasons I mentioned before. So I don't see Morena replacing PRI, and I don't think that there is anything to sustain long-term stability on the way with the victory of Claudia Sheinbaum. In fact, I think she would have much preferred not to have won that big an election, because this gives the extremes in Morena so much more power. They are emboldened to pursue issues and reforms that otherwise would not have been pursued. So I don't see a cataclysmic outcome. I don't mean to propose that. But I think that how she assumes power, and in other words, how she gets rid of him, is going to be critical, and when she does so. And maybe equally important, if not more, what happens to critical decisions that cannot be reverted have been made by that time. And there are a couple of appointments, of critical appointments among those, and there are these reforms among those. So those things that have already been made under his wing or because of his influence are probably irreversible.
Thank you, Luis. Alma, turning to you, Luis Carlos already has mentioned the upcoming USMCA review process. One of the many, many things that I've learned from Luis over the years was the importance of the North American Free Trade Agreement as a constraining factor on Mexican governments, and the fact that you created a way to lock in positive reforms within the economy. How do you see the reform agenda as it stands right now playing into investor expectations? What are you hearing from clients and partners in the private sector? How do you think it's going to impact FDI, nearshoring in particular? And then to come back to that question on USMCA, do you think that this is going to create major problems within the USMCA review process in 2026?
Well, on USMCA, I'm not worried about Mexico. I'm worried about the U.S. and the outcome of the elections in this country, and how the trade agenda could be politicized into a migration agenda, like we've seen in the past. So that is number one on USMCA. It's not a renegotiation. It's in nobody's interest to open that Pandora box. So let's talk about it straight. It's a revision and a review process. So that's the first thing. In terms of how that creates certainty and integration and a clear path of also protection to investment, that's the anchor of why North America is the most competitive region. And USMCA is the umbrella of that. In terms of the Mexico-specific context, I think that in order for nearshoring, which has become the it word of the year, in order for it to actually materialize, there's a lot of expectation, and there's some numbers of like industrial park capacity and all of this, but there's also just key challenges that I think need to be addressed in order to attract that investment. The first one is infrastructure in the country. The low level of investment in infrastructure that Mexico has is something that has to be addressed. You have 1.5% of GDP average in investment in infrastructure. That is, of course, lower than the 4.5% recommendation that the World Bank has made to Mexico. The focus on the pet projects that have been so emblematic to this administration have also inhibited for further investment into infrastructure projects that actually will bear connectivity through the country. And I think that is something that we're expecting in terms of just the plan that Mrs. Sheinbaum and her team have shared that has been welcomed in terms of how to further connect and integrate the North and the South, and this movilidad that they've been so forceful on. And I think that has been very welcomed. In terms also of infrastructure is the deep involvement of the armed forces. As I mentioned, on ports, on customs, now they run a tourism agency. I mean, that's also something that I would say on the infrastructure challenge in order how to ensure that nearshoring actually becomes a reality. Energy. Energy is another area of huge concern, not only because of what the Pemex burden is of $110 billion in what it represents in debt to Mexico, but also just in terms of priorities. Right now, renewable energy should be at the core. Transition to renewable energy is something that many members of the private sector need in order to invest. And it's not only a Mexico-specific purpose, but a global objective. Water availability is another one that also has to be addressed. In addition to, of course, the rule of law and security that we've already discussed, labor supply and mobility. Right now, we're very close for labor demand to overtake labor supply in Mexico. So that's also another area that if we were creative in how to match the migration wave that we're seeing into Mexico to the demand that the private sector needs in order to be much more productive and further their investment capacity, I think that's a no-brainer. So that's what I would say on nearshoring. And in terms of the U.S.-Mexico relationship as it regards to the private sector, I would encourage much more dialogue. The Sheinbaum team to visit Washington, to visit New York. I think that there's an appetite also to engage in clear, direct relationships and cooperate. That is the position that I've seen throughout all of the sectors that I work with.
So I want to push you a little bit on this because I asked you specifically about the judicial reform.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of talked about a lot of other things. I know that was intentional. And I want to bring in Luis and Luis Carlos on this one. Because the point that I think is fundamental here is that investors love certainty.
Definitely.
They like to see established rules of the game, and they don't want those rules to change. And Mexico has never exactly been a paradise of certainty.
Mm-mm.
However,
how dare you?
Understatement of the year, I know. However, with the NAFTA and the USMCA, a certain degree of certainty has been built in for investors. And what we learned throughout the López Obrador administration was that, to many of our surprise, the Supreme Court was actually there to interpret laws as being constitutional or non-constitutional, unconstitutional. And in the case, for example, of energy reform, that was one thing that was extremely important. If we see that being threatened right now, surely that's a bad thing for investors. Aren't they
Definitely.
nervous about that?
Yes, definitely. Yes.
It's the right answer.
Yeah.
Maybe Luis Carlos, you could talk a little bit about this as well, because this to me is the issue for September.
Yes.
This is the issue about, and why Claudia Sheinbaum as president or incoming president should be so nervous about the content of that reform, because it's why we've seen instability, volatility in the market since the election. It's because people are not certain anymore that they are going to be able to defend their investments. Sanctity of contracts. We're going to come back to this time and time again. And we've seen some backpedaling already. I mean, the conversation about getting rid of the autonomous regulatory organisms has gone, at least as being a priority. That's good news. But if we jeopardize the independence and if we politicize the Supreme Court more than it is already, does that become an existential threat to the Mexican economy?
This is an existential threat to the administration of Sheinbaum. I think she can become the best president of Mexican recent history. I think she has all the resources, the capacities, the talent, I would say. Maybe not the charisma or other political resources that López Obrador did have, but she has a lot of resources. The problem is that there is a basic contradiction in her ability to promote economic growth, which she needs to fund social programs and to benefit from nearshoring. But on the other hand, you need certainty, and you cannot accumulate power and centralize decisions and at the same time promote economic growth. That is incompatible. So she's managing to try to convince people that she is responsible, that if she has to do this judiciary reform is because López Obrador wants that she cannot do something different, and that she's going to nominate intelligent people to the court. But the problem is that in the long term, who comes next, who knows? And the problem is that the institutions matter, and this is the problem. I would say that companies and investors probably in the short term will not notice any difference from how things operate in Mexico. But in the long term, this would make a difference. I guess the scope of the reform will be constrained to the Supreme Court only, and that therefore some companies will pay to see, okay, let's wait, let's see on the evolution of this, and in some years we'll see what is the impact of this.
Thank you, Luis Carlos. Luis, I'd like to give you the last word on this because you've written so extensively over your career about this issue. Will Mexico be able to maintain the confidence of investors in spite of what's going to take place in September?
Well, the biggest difference, the biggest contrast, not in personality, but in perspectives that the two individuals have, is that she does want economic growth. She understands that without economic growth, there's no future. That's the only way to fight poverty, inequality, whatever. He believed that preserving poverty was better politically. So in that, they are very different. And for her, this is an enormous challenge. I think that she runs the risk of having a stillborn government if this passes in its present scope. I think that Luis Carlos is being a little optimistic on that it wouldn't make any difference. But I do think that if one is less picky, there will be 4 new members of the court in the next 4 years. One starting at the end of this year, and if it is she that nominates and Morena that approves, which is what's going to happen, then the 8 members that today make the 2/3 majority, because in Mexico constitutional issues require 2/3 majority in the court, will be lost, and therefore all these issues will become moot, because there will be no ability to stop or hinder whatever passes in the legislature. So I don't like the reform, but I don't think that in practice it makes that much difference. But I don't think that companies have yet figured that one.
Thank you, Luis. Thank you so much, Alma, Luis Carlos, for closing us out as the broche de oro of this wonderful event today. A round of applause for our panelists, please. And I believe that Alma and Britton are going to come up for closing remarks. Is it? Leela. You are Leela.
What a powerful panel, as always, Duncan. Thank you, and thank you to the Wilson Center on behalf of the Border Trade Alliance. We've had this partnership for 10 years, and I'm so happy that I could be a part of it for the last 7. And thanks to our sponsors, and for all of you for making the time to be here with us. Obviously, we've heard today there are countless issues. There's no shortage of issues that we are continuing to work on to win positive results, and we'll continue to work together. So thank you, Leela, and your team are fantastic.
No, thank you so much. And I just want to tell everybody, if you missed any part of any of the panels today, there will be a recording up on our website probably in the next 2 days. So if you want to revisit what was discussed in today's conference, you'll be able to do that on our website. And just to echo what Britton said, thank you to all of our sponsors. Thank you to all of our incredible speakers. Thank you for this amazing turnout of participants that really make this conference, so worthy. So thank you to everyone. And again, Britton, thank you to the Border Trade Alliance. It's always incredible to partner with you. So thank you. Thank you.